Looking back, I frequently marvel how my life took such unexpected turns. My early years were basic, growing up in a modest household where loyalty, love, and trust were fundamental principles. My parents, while not perfect, were a committed pair, and I always imagined I'd follow in their footsteps. I admired their unrelenting dedication and never anticipated my life would take such a different turn. As I grew older, I latched on to those lessons, convinced that if I did everything correctly, I would achieve the same stability and contentment. I worked hard, pursued my passions, and met someone who appeared to share my values. But things became more challenging. My cherished beliefs were put to the test in unexpected ways, and the beautiful life I envisioned crumbled. On a beautiful November morning, I found myself in the driveway, washing my 2008 Mustang, which represented the freedom and control I needed in my chaotic existence. While some found tranquility in sports such as golf, I preferred the quiet ritual of cleaning my car. I couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away, indicating that a great change is going to occur. I hoped the warm fall days would stay a little longer. I was just finishing up the cars inside when an unexpected guest broke my peace. An automobile driving erratically came to a halt in front of my house. I recognized the driver, or thought I did. It was Judy, my mother-in-law. She stumbled out, tears running down her cheeks, and I sensed something was very wrong. She left the car at an uncomfortable angle on the street and dashed down the driveway. With tears in her eyes, she ran toward me, buried her head in my chest, and burst out crying. "Come on, Judy," I urged gently. "Let's go inside so you can tell us what's going on." I led her inside the kitchen and seated her down. She sobbed. "He's such an idiot." "Would you like anything to drink, Judy?" I asked. "Do you have any tea?" she asked through her tears. I nodded, fetched her a cup, and brewed some tea. "Give me your car key so I can move it off the street," I asked. She handed me the keys, and I parked her car in the driveway. Then I asked my wife Penny to come down. When I got back, I brought Judy the tea, sugar, milk, and a slice of chocolate cake she had brought over the day before. "Thank you, Donnie," Judy sobbed, as did Penny. "You are lucky to have him. You probably won't have to worry about your hubby cheating on you." I was stunned. I could not believe Ed Penny's father would cheat on Judy. Judy grabbed my hand as I started to leave. "Donnie, you too are family. I want to chat to you," she said. "Okay, Judy, what is going on?" I questioned. "Why do men cheat?" she asked. I was uneasy. Some people believe that men are predisposed to pass on their genes. Perhaps Dad has a strong desire, but it doesn't make it proper. Penny said. Judy said, "I'm not talking about all men. I'm talking about your father who swore to be faithful, yet continually betraying his commitment." "Mom, you know Dad adores you," Penny interfered, although he occasionally battles with his nature. "All you can do is try to figure it out. When he married me, he promised to prioritize our marriage over all else." Judy stated that the doorbell rang, thereby stopping the talk. "I'll get it," I said. I'm glad for the distraction. I opened the door and found Ed, who appeared defeated. "Hi, Don," he murmured softly. "Is Judy here?" I said. "They're in the living room." He stepped inside and I returned to washing my car, attempting to clear my head. I was focused on the task when I heard a giggle behind me. Two arms curled around my waist, and a lock of dark hair dropped over my shoulder. Donnie, comma. "Do you love me?" Penny asked. "Of course I do." I mentioned Penny. "I'm going through a family issue and I need your aid. Can you grill some steaks and soothe Mom down? They might divorce this time," she suggested. "Has this happened before?" I inquired a few times. Penny stated that they love each other, but are still going through this. Dad appears to be sincere about seeking therapy right now. He realizes he cannot accomplish it alone. "Perhaps your mother should have put her foot down sooner," I recommended. "What do you mean?" Penny asked. "If I were her, I would have dumped him the first time he cheated." I told them they have to face the consequences of their decisions. He must recognize that his actions may have serious consequences for him, his wife, and his family. Penny looked at me, stunned. Her lips trembled as she attempted to hold back tears. I could tell she was about to break down. I wrapped my arms around her and told her to calm down. I would do everything for you. I said, Donnie, it's easy for you to say. Your parents were ideal, so you'd never had to cope with this. I don't want my parents to split up or be alone after we have children. I want them to have loving grandparents. I want us all to be one big, happy family, without having to worry about which parent to invite to occasions because the other will not attend. She said, Okay, honey, I responded. I'll help. I'll cook the steaks, and you can send your father to talk to me while you speak with your mother. Maybe once the lunch is ready, we can all discuss on the deck. I disagreed with what I was doing, but I loved Penny and understood her desire to keep her family together. We all want our families to stay together, even when our parents fail. So I spent the afternoon talking to my father-in-law. We talked about my Mustang and cooking steaks. He attempted to appear informed, but I knew he was full of it, especially when he lied about a car that didn't exist. Eventually, I inquired, So, what's going on with you and Judy? He looked like I was about to hit him. Then he nearly cried, adding, I didn't mean to hurt her. She was not supposed to find out. I thought that was quite original. If you didn't want to harm her, don't do the one thing that would. I remained calm, though. I was fuming inside. I pictured him hurting Penny and wanted him to leave my property. Judy deserved more. She should divorce him. I thought about my father and Uncle Steve, both of whom were good men. Any of them would have admired a woman like Judy. Instead, here was this moron attempting to salvage face by claiming he needed to reconnect with his church. I had to control my laughing at the concept. Later, Judy and Penny joined us on the deck for dinner. Ed attempted to play the penitent husband, but it was evident that he was simply attempting to save himself again. After a while, I excused myself, walked inside, and laughed so hard I sobbed when I got back. Penny gave me a suspicious look, while Ed pretended to be waiting for canonization. Judy, on the other hand, was in excruciating anguish, divided between removing him from her life and attempting to salvage what she could. She was counting on us to help her make the correct decision. So, Donnie, do you think counseling would help? Judy asked. I looked at Ed, who gave me a small nod, then at Penny, who also nodded, hoping to salvage her parents' marriage. Finally, I gazed into Judy's serious eyes and responded. Counseling can help you work through issues and notice things in your relationship that you might otherwise overlook. It was not a falsehood. I heard it on a therapy show, so it had some validity to it. Judy nodded. Okay, we'll try it. She grabbed for Ed's hand, smiling. Penny looked at me, and I felt guilty. I was doing it for her, but it didn't set right with me. I excused myself, explaining that I needed to show Ed something in the garage. Once there, I grabbed his throat and smashed him against the wall. Prick! I hissed. This is the final time I lie to save you from cheating again. If you cheat again, you'll have more to worry about than just your divorce. Got it? He swiftly nodded, and I let him go. We returned to the kitchen, where I smiled and pretended everything was okay, but Ed appeared shaken. Later that night, we had a fantastic time with Penny, but just over a month later, 3 days after Christmas, we found ourselves in the morgue, staring at Ed's body. With a flourish, the attendant drew back the sheet, revealing the dead form of a once-living man. Penny collapsed in tears. Judy turned away, and I fell into shock, my mind racing with ridiculous ideas. The attendant asked if we could identify the deceased, and Judy and Penny agreed. I am sorry for your loss, he said. His effort at a soothing grin comes across as weird. We led Penny from the morgue where a detective was waiting. So, the deceased was your husband? He asked Judy. She nodded and squeezed my hand. When he did not return home last night. I got worried, she added. Ed always called when he was going to be late. The investigator offered us coffee, but I declined after witnessing the state of the coffee maker. Penny inquired about what had happened to him. I can't go into detail about the investigation, he said, but it will be in the paper soon. Your spouse, father, and young lady were located at the Sly Easy Motel on Sycamore Avenue. He was accompanied by a woman in tears. Her husband caught them together, smashed in the door, and kept the last round for himself. You should return to the morgue and say farewell. The detective spoke gently. Ma'am, I will ask the coroner to be careful with his face, the detective offered. That won't be necessary, Judy said coldly. Not an issue. The detective stated, "We have clear evidence. The security footage exposes everything. The man kicking in the door. Your husband has already left, and there are no traces of anyone else moving around." Detective Judy spoke sternly. "I meant it wasn't required. I don't care where he is buried." Judy stood up and I followed. Penny looked at her mother and remarked to the detective, "She's upset." He simply nodded. Judy burst into tears on my shoulder as I drove them home after leaving the detective's office. Throughout the day, individuals came to offer their sympathies. Tanya, our neighbor, popped over with some snacks. "How are you holding up?" she asked. I shrugged. "It's okay, honey. We are pals," she said. "I understand you spend a lot of time with Ed. I used to watch him talking to you as you polished your Mustang." "Tanya," I whispered. "I couldn't stand the guy. He was a serial cheater by nature. Judy deserved better." She laughed, but Judy adored him. He was her first. Everything. This is why she continued forgiving him. Without him, she would be lost. But Tanya was mistaken. Judy's resentment of Ed developed over time. She declined to attend his funeral at first, but I persuaded her to go on Penny's behalf. Penny eventually became angry with both of us, particularly because I declined to speak at the funeral. I couldn't think of anything positive to say about Ed, and his best buddy struggled with the eulogy. Edie was Ed. You should have known him. Following the funeral, Judy got more connected with us. However, viewing TV shows in which a husband cheated would set her off. Penny, and I often spoke about how we could help her. Penny appeared to recover swiftly from her father's death, and life resumed approximately 3 months later. We organized a gathering and invited every eligible man we could think of for Judy. At 43, she appeared more like Penny's sister than her mother. However, Judy had no idea how to flirt or interact. She, only ever dated Ed, who had swept her off her feet when she was 18. We realized it would take time for her to adjust, so we decided to continue arranging these meetings. After the party, while we were cleaning up, I noticed Penny's phone on the counter and saw she had a message. I checked it, assuming it was from her mother, and then stopped. Penny had been texting another man, and when I read through the texts, I concluded she was dating someone else. Shocked, I stood there, feeling as if my world was crumbling. How could I miss this? Penny and I spent a lot of time together. When exactly did she find the time? Then it struck me. Penny had always protected her father, even when he was caught cheating. She said it was simply his nature. Perhaps she was more like her father than I thought. After all, you cannot oppose nature. I suppose they expected me to react like Judy. Please accept it. Despite everything, I thought Judy loved that man. Perhaps this is why she continued to forgive him until the end. Her rage may not have sprung from him cheating again, but rather from the fact that his death denied her the opportunity to forgive him once more. Is someone slacking on cleaning? Penny smiled. But that's okay. I've done enough for both of us. Let's head to the bedroom. Honey, I have to work on the brakes, I said, watching her face turn sad and frustrated. How long will this take? She asked. If I do them all, will it take me the entire night? I responded. Can we do it tomorrow? Maybe tomorrow is my chance, she continued, hinting to her own plans. Her suggestion annoyed me. Did she truly believe I would want to remain with her after she had been with someone else? Honey, I'd love it if you didn't break tonight and came to bed with me, she insisted. And I'd like it if you let me handle the breaks, after grilling and entertaining at your mother's party, I shot back. If you truly loved me, you'd do them later, she challenged. I answered, if you truly loved me, you would let me do them right now. What is wrong with you, Donnie? She asked. You typically want me all day, but now you seem distant. Do you know how many women are here? Tell me how lucky I am to have you. Tanya even mentioned what she would do to you if I weren't present. Well, tomorrow is another day. I spoke, leaving her standing there. Okay. She called after me, but I already knew what was going on. She was desperate for sex tonight because she had nothing planned for us tomorrow. She would be too exhausted from being with someone else. Perhaps I'm rushing to conclusions, I reasoned, recalling a television story in which a jealous husband incorrectly believed his wife was cheating. He rented an automobile he thought belonged to her partner, only to discover that it was a gift for him. His wife divorced him. The following morning, I went to work as usual. Penny brought me breakfast, and I apologized. I love you, Penny. "What has gotten into you this morning?" she asked, smiling. "I just wanted you to understand how much I care about you." I remarked, feeling horrible, as if I was attempting to prevent her from doing something we would both regret at work. I became completely immersed in my tasks. By 9:30, I was ahead of schedule and left early. Penny called as I was leaving. "Hello, honey," she said. "Do you want to eat lunch together?" "I'd love to," I said. "Home or restaurant?" I felt relieved, believing I had made a mistake. Then she said, "Hold on, I have another call." A few seconds later, she reappeared. "Can we have lunch tomorrow? Mom needs to chat." "I'll probably be busy," I said before hanging up, my suspicions returning. I called Judy. "How is your day going?" I inquired. "Better now that I've heard from my favorite son-in-law," she said. "Your only son-in-law?" I reminded her. Yet she remained my favorite. She laughed. "Have you spoken to Penny today?" "Judy mentioned she will ask you something shortly." "Just don't set me up with one of your friends again," she laughed. "I am not ready to date. No, just a supper for 3 of us." I said, "Oh, it sounds good." Judy said, "I'll pretend to be surprised when she calls." "Bye, Judy. Have a good day." I ended the call. The call delayed me by 5 minutes, and I knew Penny had merely called to confirm my presence at work. Maybe she'd learned a few tactics from her father, who got caught frequently. I drove directly to the motel and immediately noticed Penny's Ford Focus in the parking lot. I knew exactly which room to go into. I spotted a cleaning lady nearby and paid her $50 to softly open the door. As soon as I walked in, I noticed him trying to turn around. I crossed the room, grabbed him from the bed, and slammed him to the hard floor. "Donnie, what are you doing?" Penny screamed and tried to pull me away. I quietly rose up and took her hands away from me. "Do not ever touch me again," I replied harshly. I called my secretary and informed her that I was sick and would be unavailable for the remainder of the day and the next day. Then I called emergency to report an attack. Penny sat silently on the bed, attempting to communicate, but I repeatedly told her to shut up. "Donnie, when we got home," she began. I interrupted, saying, "We don't have a home. I am not living with a cheater. Go to your mother's." The cops arrived, and I went outside to speak with them. "I am the one who called." I said, "You don't look hurt." One of the cops commented, "Not me, him." I pointed at Rick, who remained unconscious. As soon as the paramedics arrived, they handcuffed me and put me in the cruiser. I could scarcely speak because I was too numb to explain. At the station, I was arrested on suspicion of attacking. They didn't have any concrete evidence yet, just suspicions. And I was not in the mood to confess. In the holding cell with 8 others, I sat on a bench, lost in meditation. There's a considerable difference between fearing your spouse is cheating and addressing them. People evolve, and this might lead to a divide. However, in certain circumstances, the hate grows and the divorce becomes a war. But for me, it wasn't like that. I adored Penny and had planned to spend my entire life with her before entering that motel room. Seeing her with Rick, an older, obese, bald man, devastated me. I didn't get it. If she desired someone like that, why should she marry me? She was the one who sought me from the beginning. As I sat there trying to make sense of everything, a stout police officer approached me and addressed me as Don Osmond. I approached the bars as he opened the door, accompanied by 2 other officers. "Are you going to shoot me?" I asked. "No, you moron." The cop said, "You have been bailed out." "By whom?" I asked. He simply gave me a blank stare. "Does it matter?" he asked. "What are the charges? Who bailed me out? How long have I been here?" I pressed. "Buddy, you've asked too many questions. Do you want out?" he snapped. "Officer," I said, trying to remain calm, "I understand you deal with a lot of people, but this is my first time in jail. If you could simply answer a few questions for me, it would be really appreciated." The other officers glanced at him, and he sighed. "Fine. It's 2 p.m., and you've been here for nearly 2 hours. I leaned in and spoke softly so only them could hear. I discovered my wife with our neighbor in a motel. I realize I didn't handle it well, but I don't want to see either of them again. If Penny bailed me out, I'd rather remain here. "Sorry, kid," he said. "This is her." She cried the entire time. "But do not worry. Some overweight guy and his lawyer spoke with the prosecutor. They aren't filing charges, but I wouldn't trust them. You'll be here for a few days to chill off." Then you can get yourself out. I sat back down, knowing that the other detainees were watching me. They undoubtedly wondered why I didn't leave. I knew Penny was trying to help me because she felt bad, but I didn't want anything to do with her. I couldn't help but recall how I had persuaded Judy to forgive. However, I couldn't do the same for Penny. Just then, the cop returned. "Hello, Osmond. There is someone else here to see you. This is not the first one. Judy is her sister. She is in the interrogation room. Want to see her?" "Yes," I answered. He handcuffed me and dragged me into a room separated by bulletproof glass. I sat down and looked at Judy through the glass. "Hi, Donnie," she said. "What's happening? Penny just told you hit up your neighbor and refused to let her bail you out." Judy cheated on me. I said that her face sank with his. "That is disgusting." "But why?" "According to what she informed me, you are always." Before we could finish, a tall man wearing a poor suit banged on the wall. "Excuse me?" he said. "Are you Donald Osmond?" I nodded. "Can you join me in the conference room across the hall once you're finished here?" he asked. "The officers uncuffed me. He is not a threat." "Why the cuffs?" a man inquired. "He is coming to assault," the cop explained, but frankly, I would have done the same thing. "Donnie, don't do anything stupid," Judy said. "I understand how you feel. I will call you tomorrow." I said, "If I get out today, I will send Penny to stay with you." I entered the conference room where Penny, Rick, and 2 other men were sitting. Penny got up, and Rick limped towards me. "Get away from me," I shouted. "If any of these idiots approach me, I'm going back to my jail. The guy at the table introduced himself. "Mr. Osmond, I am Willis Drummond, the district attorney. Mr. Daniels represents your neighbor. We have a suggestion that would allow everyone to leave now." "What exactly are you talking about, Willis?" I asked. Drummond turned to Daniels. "Why don't you explain, Charlie?" He said this as Daniels started talking to me like we were old friends. This is an unfortunate situation. The emotional toll alone is devastating. There's no reason you should leave here with a criminal record that will haunt you. These charges of assault and battery with intent to cause grievous harm are serious, according to Daniel. "I'm not worried," I said. "My education and specialty will not have an impact on my career." Daniel swallowed. "There is no reason for an innocent person to suffer because of a situation that has spiraled out of control. Innocent? Who here is innocent?" "I'm the one who was hurt," I explained. Penny burst into tears right then. "I thought I had a wife I could love forever. I was wrong. I believed I had a trustworthy neighbor next door. Wrong again. Donnie." "What about Tanya?" Rick asked. "She hasn't done anything wrong. Why did you hurt her?" "Tanya deserves to know the truth. She deserved better than a cheater." "She'll be fine without you," I said. "Maybe we can get through this together." "No," Rick pleaded. "Do not tell her." Daniels jumped in. "Here is the deal. My client will not file charges if you promise to forget this ever happened." "I will not forget," I said. "I will take it before a jury. When they understand why I struck your customer, they will understand. I'll mention him in my divorce case and testify against him in Tanya's." The 4 of them crowded together and argued quietly before returning their attention to me. "What do you want?" they inquired. "Nothing," I responded. "I will not inform Tanya or sue you, but you must testify in the divorce, reject the charges, and remain 50 feet away from me and my belongings." Rick grins and says, "Deal." "Good. I know I'm approximately 50 feet from her now, but it starts when I leave the building, right?" I added. "I do not care what you do." Rick mumbled, "She's not mine anymore." "Can I leave now?" I asked. "No," Penny shouted. "We aren't doing this." Willis took me to the desk so I could grab my belongings. "I need my wallet to take a taxi." As I walked out, I could only hear Penny crying. Tanya was outside calling for me when I arrived home. "Where have you been, stranger?" she asked. My hubby got into a horrible position and was roughed up. Poor guy. I said, "It's tough." "Tanya, I'm sorry, but I've had a difficult day too. We will chat later." "Send your wife over," she said. "Tanya, I do not have a wife anymore," I replied, shocking her. Inside, Penny's phone rang, but I let it go to voicemail. Following the 5th call, it went silent until ringing again, this time from Judy's number. I took up the phone and told her to stop calling. "Judy, can you? I started. Honey, you've got to." I hung up. A half hour later, the phone rang again. It was Judy. I responded. "Donnie, are you there?" she asked. "Hello, Judy." I said. I had to give Penny tea with sleeping tablets. She is out of control, weeping and blaming everyone for destroying her life. I believe it, I said sadly, but there are few people to blame. She blames Rick, claiming he duped her into the agreement. She also blames you for your actions. How am I doing? I asked Donnie. You aren't acting like yourself, she said quietly. That was just what she expected. Will it ever get better? I asked. No, she whispered. Things become worse. You start to mistrust yourself, wondering what's wrong with you. Why did he choose someone else? You compare yourself to others. And every time he's late or not where he's supposed to be, you expect the worse. It never goes gone, and you never truly trust again. Judy, may I tell you something? I asked. Of course, we're family, she explained. I lied to you, I admitted, while we were attempting to persuade you to return Ed and go to counseling. I felt you should ignore his cheating. But you said what Penny requested because you adore her, she finished. I understand, Donnie. You are a lousy liar. Your mouth speaks one thing and your eyes see another. Ed was a fool. I stated that no one he cheated with was worth a fraction of you. Perhaps it's in their blood, she said. I can't believe Penny ever let that nasty guy to get near her. She cut herself off. Donnie, I apologize, but I am not you. I'm not going to keep taking her back just so she can do it again. Maybe she inherited it from her father, I suggested. She always said that you couldn't fight nature. I hope this is not true, she said. You may train wild animals, Perhaps humans can change too, but that's uncommon, Judy, and it requires a lot of effort, I responded. Cheaters will cheat. So what does this mean for us? She asked quietly. We have two options. I told them we could move on and start over, knowing we were just good people who love the wrong people. You have a stunning daughter to show for it. I don't have anything, thus my life feels squandered. We can stay and hope things change. But then we're just fools for putting up with this. You deserve someone who is worthy of you. And I should find someone who is too. Who are you speaking to? Mom, Penny asked. Is this Donnie? Does he want to talk to me yet? Judy, have you told him how sorry I am? I said. It appears that you have your hands full. In the days that followed, I spoke with Judy frequently. Tanya and a few neighbors brought me food and spoke. I hired a lawyer and drafted a reasonable divorce agreement. I wanted to divide things equally. Even though it was unfair to me, I didn't want things to turn ugly. But I was prepared to go to court if necessary. My lawyer persuaded Rick to reveal everything. It had been going on for more than 6 months, and Rick was convinced he wasn't the first. I asked Judy if I might come over to talk when I arrived. She opened the door, and I hugged her. Penny came up to me. Donnie, I've missed you so much, she said. Penny, I am here to make things easy. I stated I didn't want a stranger to give you divorce papers, so I brought them myself. No, Donnie, she implored. I will quit. This won't happen again. You need to give me another chance. I am going to see a counselor. Penny, that will not help. I said, It's not the first time. My lawyer questioned Rick. We know everything. You've been with him for more than 6 months, and I doubt he's the first. How could you look me in the eyes? It was just sex, she explained. You and I are far more than that. You and I are nothing anymore, I responded. All that remains is a gold ring. That means nothing if the promises are broken. Donnie, please, she implored. No, Penny, I replied. I am not living like this. You are being unfair, she whined. You are tearing my heart out. You love me, damn it. Penny, Judy said, shut up. Mom, stay out of this, Penny snapped. He is being unreasonable. It does not have to be this way. I adore him so much. I feel like my heart is going to burst. Boo, 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 Judy shouted. Penny, you are just like your father. You act as if the world revolves around you and what you desire. I forgave your father multiple times, and maybe you believe that's how it should be. But Donnie is not me. You are a grown lady, so behave like one. You had the perfect marriage, but you ruined it. Now get over it. Donnie is also hurting. He's been quite depressed. I can't believe you did this to someone who adores you so much. But your father did the same thing to me. I quote, am delighted he's free now. I wish I had been, but Mom, I'm also depressed. Penny responded, I know I was wrong and I apologize. I'm hurting as well. Penny, it's your own fault. As much as I love you, you could deserve it. Judy responded, I agree. Penny stated, but I don't think it was bad enough to get divorced over. Shouldn't it be up to the person you've hurt? Judy asked. Marriage is about what both partners want? Penny, maybe Donnie doesn't want to marry you anymore. Stop saying that, Mother, Penny yelled. She turned to face me. Donnie, have not I been a nice wife? I've cleaned, cooked, and provided everything you could want. Why can't you see what I did right instead of my mistakes? I feel adrift without you. I can't stop crying. I feel as if my life is over. You can help both of us improve. Please forgive me this once. I swear it will not happen again. I exited the room without replying to the door. I went to Penny and said, Get a lawyer. I want to get this over with and start over. I got home and spotted Tanya again as I stepped onto the porch. Hello, Donnie. Please wait, she called out. I sighed as she moved across the yard. She was clothed in old denim shorts and a sweaty t-shirt. Clearly, they forgot or bypassed wearing a bra. I need to tell you a few things, she explained. Tanya was not as slim as Penny or Judy, but now that I wasn't with Penny, I noticed her more. Why are you staring at me that way? She asked. Sorry, I said I shouldn't have. I simply wanted you to know that Rick and I are here for you. We are available if you have any questions or simply want to talk. Rick, who is still disturbed from being mugged and talking, may also be able to aid him. Helping others might make you feel stronger, but it is not what I intended, she added, smiling. You know I'm married, and you're not that type of guy. I smiled weakly, considering giving her the truth about Rick, but I knew it would only hurt her. Furthermore, Rick was undoubtedly doing his best to be the spouse she deserved after what had transpired. There was no need to make matters worse, Donnie. It's a cruise, she added. One of our clients is planning a singles cruise, and accommodations are still available. 10 days of enjoyment in the sun could help mend a wounded heart. Who knows? You may even meet someone. I'll think about it, Tanya, I said, but I do not believe I should date anyone till my divorce is finalized. Donnie, you're a decent guy, whatever Penny did. I hope she understands how silly she is. Let me know about the cruise, okay? I did my best to make things right with Penny. My lawyer handled the divorce, and I moved on with my life. I asked my manager to move me to another place and explained why. A few days later, he arranged for me to relocate to our Phoenix factory, which was interviewing engineers. It seemed like the ideal setting for a fresh start. Warm weather and the opportunity to drive my car year-round. I would leave everything and everyone behind, but that is what starting over entails. When I told Judy about my plans to leave the area, she was sad but understood my reasoning. She agreed with me, feeling similar emotions as she digested Ed's death and her daughter's treachery. She had considered moving to New York to live with her sister and mother, and after our chat, she started really considering it again. I made her agree not to tell Penny about my plans. Judy replied, Honey, I don't have to. That girl is infatuated with you. She spends the most of her time following you around, frightened you'll find someone else. She was outraged when she noticed you talking to Tanya on the porch. I called her every name in the book and sobbed for hours. She is worried that you would fall for Tanya and tell her everything. Then you end up together. It's not too far-fetched, I said. True, she said. Donnie, you truly adore my daughter. I can see you trying to figure out how to get her back. The other day, but I'm pleased you didn't. She's my baby and I adore her. But I also adore you, Donnie. We both know what she is like. At least when this is done, you will have a friend in Arizona and I will have one in New York. She said, Promise me that we will stay in touch. I do not have an option. I said, I've only loved 2 individuals and one of them does not love me back. You are all I have left. I appreciated Judy informing me that Penny was following me. I began keeping an eye on her whenever I walked outside. I went to see a movie one night and noticed her eyeing me in the parking lot. I chose to have some fun. I pretended to wait for someone, purchased a ticket using the app, and then contacted Judy to inform Penny that I had a date. Penny stormed out of her car and approached me, but I quickly ran inside, purchased my ticket, and entered the cinema just as she arrived. She couldn't find me, and with 15 movies playing, she couldn't tell which one I was viewing. 2 hours later, I stepped out, pretending to say goodbye to someone. Penny appeared to be outraged. Cut the crap, Donnie, she yelled. Did you go to the movies alone? I've been following you since your departure. Get used to it, I told Penny. I will not always be alone. I'll eventually meet someone I'd like to be with. You have already met her, moron. She looks exactly like me. Penny said you only had to get over my one tiny error. I laughed and walked away, understanding Judy was correct. I trusted Judy not to inform Penny about my plans, but I still needed to leave town without her knowing where I was headed. The solution arrived from an unexpected source. The next day, I heard a knock on the rear door. When I opened it, Rick stood there, nervous as ever. As if he didn't belong there, Tanya watched from their porch, smiling. I didn't want to come, Rick explained, but she made me. He looked over my shoulder at Tanya. Come in. I spoke loudly enough for her to hear. I performed all you requested, he spoke uncomfortably. And I'm glad you didn't inform Tanya. Even if she hadn't forced me to come, I would have contacted you regardless, We have an issue, I said. We have nothing in common. True, he stated, but we both want to protect Tanya. We both have issues with your ex. Penny has threatened to tell Tanya everything unless I help her get you back. She believes it is unfair for one of us to keep our marriage if we have both been cheating. She quote blackmailing me into spying on you and forcing you to accept her back. I merely stared at him, recognizing that I could take advantage of the circumstance. Rick. Do it, I said. He looked at me puzzled. Does Penny know about the cruise Tanya arranged for me, I asked. I do not think so, he responded. That is your information to give her. I suggested telling her about the cruise. It will keep her engaged for a while, especially if you mention that we might converse on the ship because we will be locked together. All right, he agreed. I'll do anything to salvage my marriage. Good. You can leave. I said. The next day, Tanya called me Danny. Penny somehow learned about the cruise. Should I book her on the wrong one or place her in a room near yours? She asked. Tanya, make her pay the full amount, I said. You will benefit me more than you realize. Are you both back together? She asked. There's no chance. I said. But why? What are you so upset about? She cheated on me, Tanya, I said sadly. I walked in and caught them. There were no mistakes. We're finished. I simply need to get away. In the coming days, I prepared for the relocation by looking at houses, contacting moving companies, and calling the new office in Phoenix. I still speak with Judy every day, but the worst day before I left was when she relocated to New York. I dropped by to say goodbye, and Penny was present. She hadn't been following me around lately because she was so busy planning for the cruise. She grinned as she opened the door. I miss you so terribly, honey, she murmured. I ignored her and walked directly to Judy. She hugged me tight. I wish you hugged your wife like that, Not my mother, Penny said. It's probably good. Mom is moving to New York. I believe you are confused about who you care about. Judy and I laughed. Penny was transporting Judy to the airport. I said my goodbyes and pledged to call Judy every day. I hope you would call me, Penny remarked. You realize you're wasting your time with this divorce. By the time we go to court, you'll have forgotten why you wanted it. I observed you withdrew a significant sum of money from our account, but I said nothing because I did the same thing. Funny coincidence, I just went away. She was overjoyed, acting as if we were about to embark on a second honeymoon, unaware that we would be on the same cruise but not together. She never considered the possibility of me being with someone else on the cruise. 3 days later, I was prepared to depart. Tanya had everything prepared for the cruise. I called Penny just before the ship left. Penny, I won't be home for around 10 days. I informed her that if she needed anything about the divorce, she could contact my lawyer. Thank you for informing me, she replied cheerfully. Perhaps when you return, you won't desire a divorce. Perhaps something will remind you of how much we need each other. Not likely, I replied, chuckling. She also laughed. Is it so difficult to confess you still love me, Danny? She asked. No, it is not. I said, I still love you. I just want you to love me enough so that I can be enough. I do, you fool. She spoke regretfully. I quote, V concluded that life without you isn't worth it. Yes, I made an error, but it was not about love. I don't know what pulled me to Rick. If you enjoy old sayings, perhaps we can figure it out in therapy. I said, have you listened? You can't fight nature. As I hung up, she gave me an odd look. 6 hours later, the ship was at sea and nearly out of cellular range when my phone phoned. I stared at the TV and grinned as I saw the scenery pass by. I considered how Penny would be looking out her porthole. But I did have a window. Where in the hell are you? She shouted. I searched the entire dang ship, and you are not on it, Dot. Who claimed I was? I laughed. How can we reconcile if we do not spend time together? She yelled. You won't let me return home. You do not touch me, and you barely speak to me. I'm going nuts. I love you, Donnie. Okay, Penny, I explained. After the cruise, you are welcome to return home, but we will not be sleeping together. I'll do whatever it takes to get back in your bed and heart, she murmured, her voice trembling. I love you, Donnie. The connection went silent, and I chuckled as I entered another state. I chose to call my soul pal. Hello, Judy, I remarked when she replied. Donnie, she squealed. It has been so long since you called. Almost 4 hours, I joked. I believe I made an error. She said, Do you know what it's like to live with 2 stuck-up elderly ladies? I began laughing. Judy always uplifted my spirits. Stop lying, Judy. Everyone enjoys being around you. I asked Donnie. Do you know what time it is? She asked. They claim that time heals all wounds, I responded. They are wrong. She spoke seriously. I forgot how much I disagreed with my sister. I don't fit in anymore because she and her mother seem so similar. I laughed again. Do you check your rearview mirror to ensure you aren't being followed? She asked. It's difficult to keep up with the truck when you're on a ship, I explained. She laughed. I'm not going to question how you got on the ship without her. Remember the cow weapon commercial? I knew my own ancient Chinese secret. I answered, I love that commercial. She replied, I guess I should go cook Mommy's tapioca. Drive safely. Honey. I arrived in Phoenix the following afternoon. The first thing I did was unload my Mustang into the garage. I was pleased it wouldn't have to endure cold winters again, even if I didn't consider the heat and potential sun damage during the next few days. I settled in and set up my new home, Dot. The house was lovely, but it did not feel like a home, only a place. The day before, I was set to begin my new work. My cell phone rang without me looking. I picked it up. Where are you now? She hissed. Why is all of your stuff gone? You told I could come home, but suddenly the house is vacant. You're home, right? Isn't this what you wanted? I said. You understand that's not what I meant, she hissed. I do not want an empty house. This is almost as awful as the divorce you are advocating for. I answered, don't worry about the divorce without proof. My lawyer said I was screwed. I was at your mercy. So the divorce resulting from your romance with Rick is off. Good. She expressed relief. Now where are you? I will come to you. I filed again, I explained. This time I'm not going to be as kind. She laughed. Is it important why you filed? Call your lawyer, Penny. He already has the paperwork. I will not only get divorced, but I will also leave you with nearly nothing. By the way, I am changing my phone number tomorrow. An hour later, Penny called back. Okay, Donnie, you won. I signed the paperwork. How did you get this video? I hired a private investigator to fill my spot on the cruise. I knew you'd fulfill your wishes if I wasn't around. I set you free. I never even saw the video. Donnie, thank you for confirming what I suspected about you. I can change, she said. I do not think you can. I responded, and frankly, you shouldn't. You are now free to do whatever you choose. I'm also free to meet someone who will love me in the way I need. Donnie, you do not comprehend, she cried. It's me. My father adored my mother more than anything, but he continued to cheat. It did not signify anything. It was only sex. They were in love, and this is why she couldn't let him go. You and I are the same. You will miss me, and when you do, I'll be here. But I will make you regret putting me through this. 3 weeks later, I was still calling Judy every day. I heard sadness in her voice. Okay, Judy, what is wrong? I asked. I am all right, she said, just a little out of sorts. Judy, please do not take this out on someone who does not know you. Tell me what's actually wrong. Donnie, your move here was a mistake, Judy said. I spent the majority of the money from selling the house on taxes and improvements, so now I'm trapped. My only source of income is Ed's pension, which meets my expenditures but is insufficient to relocate or purchase another home. I thought moving in with relatives would be ideal, but I guess I didn't want to be alone after 20 years of living with someone. At least you still have a family to live with. I said, Oh no, she responded. That is not an option. You don't know what Penny has been up to since you divorced her. No, I don't, I responded, but I wasn't referring to her. Why not come live with me? I have plenty of space and would love to have you. Donnie, are you crazy? She asked. I cannot live with you. You are my daughter's ex-husband. Not anymore. I invited you to visit. Even if you don't like it, you can always return to New York. Okay, she agreed. How about a week-long visit? I want to make sure you are okay. I've been visiting Penny in your old place, so do you recognize it? Judy came to spend a week with me and had so much fun that she didn't want to go. We did everything together, including sightseeing, shopping, and transforming my place into our home. By the end of the week, I dreaded her departure. She was due to leave that morning. She cooked me breakfast and asked why I was so depressed. Are the weeks over? I stated I was going to miss you. Can you come back soon? No, she replied. And honestly, Donnie, I don't think you want me to. Judy, you are my best friend. Of course I do. Don't you want to come back? No, she smiled. Because coming back means I've left, and I do not want to. I grinned and embraced her tightly. We both knew something was going on, but neither of us was willing to confess it. The next morning, she made me breakfast again. I can't send you to work on an empty stomach, she explained, and I am taking you to work today. I need a car to go shopping. Are you certain you don't want to drive the truck? I asked. She put out her lower lip and extended her hand. For some reason, I didn't mind letting her drive my Mustang, something I never allowed Penny to do. I handed her the keys, and her smile brightened my day. Following breakfast, we drove to my office. I expected her to depart, but instead she walked in with me, looked about, and even met my secretary. Then she brought me into my inner office. So why have you not slept with her yet? She teased. She isn't my type. I said... Judy chuckled and offered to bring me up after work. That evening, we cooked steaks and watched the sunset. I saw she had not just gone shopping. She'd also added minor things to make the house feel more like home. Over the next 3 weeks, things moved slowly but steadily. We spent our evenings together driving on long drives, photographing vistas, watching movies, and trying new restaurants. But most importantly, we cherished calm nights at home. I often suggested we go out because I was concerned about what might happen if we spent too much time alone together. About 5 months later, on Judy's birthday, I wanted to make it memorable. I purchased her a diamond necklace and made reservations at a luxury restaurant. We had a fantastic supper, and a violinist serenaded us with Happy Birthday. When I handed her the necklace, her eyes brightened up and she requested me to put it on her. I observed her smiling and pointing behind me. I turned to see the waiter standing there ready to serve us. The waiter said, I was just telling you, sir, that your wife is the most beautiful woman here. You're correct about that. I responded, Danny, you should thank him. Foolish. Judy giggled. Or at least correct him. He believed we were married. I cannot thank you enough. I said it would imply that I had something to do with you being so gorgeous. And I didn't contradict him since I don't mind if people assume we're married. Are you ready for dessert? Yes, she said. Can we take it home to eat? There? Hearing her say home rather than your house touched my heart. When we returned, it felt like the ideal finale to a fantastic night. It seemed funny, but by 30, I realized I didn't need anything else to be happy. When we arrived home, we made love, washed, and collapsed into bed. I love you, Judy, I said. She stated it had been 5 months. I can't believe we have been doing this for 5 months. We wouldn't have lasted this long if we were the sort to simply jump into bed with someone, I explained. Maybe not, she said, laughing. But we are both the types who love truly and exclusively. When I arrived home the next night, dinner had already been prepared and she had another idea. I wanted to ensure that last night was not a fluke. She laughed. We set a rule not to discuss Ed or Penny. We left the past behind and focused on the future. We had so much fun together that there was no time to dwell on the past. We did many things together for the first time, but we never discussed marriage. It simply never came up, even though everyone expected us to. That was until the past got up to us. Our mistake was relocating Judy's stuff from New York to Phoenix. Penny went looking for her mother, grandmother, and aunt, unknowing of the circumstances. We gave her our address. That's when the trouble began. One Saturday, I went out to get BBQ items. While I was gone, Penny appeared on our porch. Judy had no choice but to let her inside. I hoped I would be gone long enough to get rid of her. Penny instantly recognized Judy wasn't living alone and that her housemate was probably a man. Judy confirmed and agreed to see her for breakfast the following morning. Penny drove away but got disoriented and noticed my car on her way out. Judy chose to wait until we had calmed down before telling me the terrible news. As we were grilling steaks and preparing to relax, we saw someone peering over our 6-foot fence. Penny, quote, S eyes widened and she began screaming. We allowed her in. "I can't believe you two," she cried. "Especially you, Mom. What would Daddy think? Penny, we're not married anymore," I asked. "So what are you doing here?" "I came to find my mother. She said I hoped she knew where you were. I need help." "What kind of assistance?" I asked. "I've lost practically all of the money you left me, and I'm about to lose my house. I hoped you would give me another chance. I realized how dumb I was." She spoke regretfully. "I apologize, Penny, but there is no chance. I said that you couldn't fight nature." "Yes, you can," she insisted. "If you want it badly enough, you can achieve anything. I swear I have changed." I had Judy's nature in mind when I said this. I smiled. "It's in our nature to fall in love and stay there forever. We can't fight it. But because you're our daughter, we'll help with the housework. Go home and I will deposit some money into your account. However, you will need to get employment." "Why can't I just stay here with you?" she asked. "Penny, simply being near you reminds me of what you did. And this gets me upset all over again. This is why I left town. Do you want the money or not?" "Of course," she replied. She then gave Judy a direct look. "You don't want me here, Mom. You understand that if I had a fair chance, you would lose. Donnie agrees with you just because he believes he loves you. But truthfully, he still loves me. He sticks with you because you are just like me. And he knows you will not cheat on him." Judy and I both laughed. We had already talked about our past, so Penny's statements didn't bother us. Judy enjoyed the fact that I preferred her kindness over sense. I just had eyes for her. Penny left the next morning, still upset that we had not let her stay, but it would have been inconvenient. Judy and I were pleased with how everything turned out. We both wanted to be alone together, and we felt responsible for what happened to Penny, but we were satisfied with our decision. Later, we discovered that Penny had slept with other men in our neighborhood, including some of our friends, resulting in a lot of gossip. Tanya confronted a couple of males who were leaving the premises. That's how she discovered everything. She told them they should be ashamed for embarrassing their wives with the neighbor's mistress. They advised her to mind her own business and that she focus on her own marriage instead. They suggested that was why I divorced Penny and fled. Tanya confronted Rick, who broke down and confessed his guilt. 2 days later, while Penny was packing her baggage, she had an unusual feeling as she was going to phone one of the guys. She observed Tanya sitting in the darkness. Tanya remarked, "I always thought we were friends." There are tears in her eyes. Penny, quote, S response shocked us. "You had everything, Penny. A lovely home, a satisfying life, and a husband who cherished you. Why was that not enough?" Tanya asked. I never imagined he would find out, and he added, "I love him, but I can't control myself. It's just something in me that resembles my father." Tanya replied, "I suppose you can't fight nature when that kind of desire takes over." And then she shot Penny. Tanya called 911 and waited for the police. Tanya was sentenced to 8 to 15 years in prison after it was determined that her actions were motivated by passion. Rick vowed to wait for her and pay her a visit every week. Judy and I married after Penny died. We understood we were all that each other had. There were publications about us, especially since it is still uncommon for a woman in her 40s to bear twins to full term. We did not call them Penny and Ed, since we followed our rule of putting the past behind. Judy and I frequently visit Penny's cemetery and talk to her. It is terrible and tragic when someone dies, and we do not wish such destiny upon her. Despite the fact that neither of us had any involvement in her death, we both feel guilty. Both Ed and Penny were victims of their nature. It's poetic in the sense that Penny couldn't learn from her father's faults and suffered the same end. I suppose you can't fight nature. In spite of everything, we lived happily ever after. Here is the next story. I sat there thinking something was badly wrong. This was neither the first nor the last of my sad, lonely, alone experiences. I wasn't sure what it was. Her months of on-site investigation in a foreign town in southern Utah had undoubtedly contributed to this outcome. My wife of 5 years had returned from 2 months of research in the deserts of southern Utah. She was finishing up her PhD research with a sociological focus. She was now spending the day and night alone at her computer, typing up her experiences and research findings for her thesis. It appears that I spent many days and nights alone at my desk, attempting to deal with the interpersonal issues developing between Susan and myself. I felt it was entirely her fault. She refused to participate in resolving the growing, serious issue of trust. She refused to engage in conversation despite my repeated requests. I was out of thoughts about how to free myself from my increasing pain and mistrust. Susan wasn't going to assist. She had never been this way before we separated on our excursions. You quote, probably going to question why I believe something is wrong. So, let me give you some information to chew on and see if you end up wondering as much as I do. First, let me tell you a little bit about ourselves. Well, I am a geologist who works for an oil exploration company. Yes, we study rock. And what lies in between them? Like oil and gas. I earned a master's degree 3 years ago. I will brag just a little. Sorry for that. But I'm good at what I do. I graduated summa cum laude and have excellent hand-eye coordination. That probably explains why I'm a world-class marksman and a decent cellist. I can also deliver the Echo probe 800 feet underwater to within an inch of where we want it. My pay reflects my knowledge and abilities. After graduate school, I was heavily recruited and immediately began working in oil exploration. Being at the top of my class helped me get exactly the job I wanted. There is still a lot of competition in the oil exploration and drilling community to see who can get to the oil first and for the lowest price. The large oil companies believe that new sources of oil are critical. They value my efforts to discover new sources. I am an average height of 70 inches and weigh 175 pounds with light brown hair and a small goatee. My name is Ethan Allen. Sorry, no relation to the well-known furniture manufacturer. I have to create my own fame. My wife is 67 inches tall with nice hips and long black hair that almost reaches her waist. She goes by Susan. She has a little habit of swirling her head to make her hair swing, sometimes over her shoulder. She has a plain Jane face with a little makeup and a smile, and her hair hangs loosely over her shoulders. She is lithe and slim with nearly ideal, sensual female proportions. You can correctly assume she is quite intelligent. She also graduated from magna cum laude and was accepted into a well-known doctoral program in Utah, which serves as proof of this. She is primarily an academic type. Before pursuing her master's degree, she taught high school for 1 year after finishing college. She enjoys academics, research, and teaching. It turns out she loved them too much. My wife and I met in college in Colorado, which is my home state. We married in college. That happened 5 years ago. She was a junior, whereas I was a senior. We both completed master's degrees in our chosen fields. Her major is sociology with a minor in psychology, the study of human group behavior. Mine is a lot harder. Field geologists investigate rocks, the earth, and everything from the surface downward. While in college, I was voted president of the Marksman Society. My extracurricular activities included playing cello in a concert orchestra. I've kept an interest in both. I was quite good, winning multiple awards in national collegiate competitions. Susan was also an active member of the Drama Society. Let me talk a little about our families. I know very little about her family, except that her mother was divorced or a single parent. Her mother never spoke of Susan's father. Susan didn't either. I didn't care, assuming he was a non-entity. Now for the two of them. We remained on cordial terms with Susan's mother. I did not press her about her history. She completed high school and then attended college in Utah, where she earned a teaching credential and a bachelor's degree in education. She teaches in lower grades. She appears happy, peaceful, efficient, and committed to her instruction. I believe Susan took up her characteristics. When I ask Susan about her family background, I notice a darker side. Susan will not discuss her early years. I didn't push her either. My wife was the only child. I have 2 younger brothers. One is in the Army, while the other is in the Air Force. We don't see much of them because they're continually deployed across the world. My folks live in Colorado, not far away from us. We pay them infrequent visits and communicate with them on a regular basis by phone. I just arrived back into town a few days ago. This was only a few days after she returned from her research project. I picked up my automobile from the corporate offices, where it had been parked in a secure parking space for the previous 2 months. I left it there before leaving to Africa. I drove the final 50 miles to our hometown, where we had a fine but little ranch-style home in a beautiful valley. The small town is surrounded by distant, high, snow-capped peaks. The valley offers an abundance of water year-round. This village is as close to heaven as I can go on this planet, Earth. I traveled to offshore West Africa on and off to conduct oil exploration investigations. On this trip, I had been gone for about 9 weeks. In exchange, I get lots of free time in between and the ability to file reports online from home. Susan and I had originally agreed that she would spend 1 month on-site conducting research for her thesis. I was to be shipbound in the scorching eastern Atlantic off the coast of West Africa. We both left home on the same day. She is going to southern Utah while I am going to Atlantic Africa. I took her to the bus station and then returned home. I drove to corporate headquarters, parked in a secure area, and then took a taxi to the airport. When I returned, it was always the exact opposite. When I returned, Susan met me at the door and welcomed me back to the United States. She did not say, "Welcome home," but rather, "Welcome back to the States." She told me she had just returned a few days earlier. Obviously, she had been gone for 2 months, not just 1. Immediately after entering our front door and greeting Susan, she informed me that she had a very busy schedule preparing her thesis and wanted to be isolated in the den to continue recording and analyzing her data. For this reason, she simply stated, "I have locked the door to ensure that I am not disturbed, so please don't bother me while I am working." I saw no need for a lock because I would comply with her reasonable request without it. I saw no reason to lock me out. I told her that she had not informed me of her extended stay. She did inform me she didn't have access to phones or email. She explained that she was living in this town and had to adapt to their clannish and unusual lifestyle. If she did acquire the facts she needed for her research thesis, I couldn't believe she didn't alert me. This seemed ridiculous. After all, cell phones are ubiquitous. She also owns a prepaid long-distance card. She took her laptop, which has an internet connection. Heck, I could speak with our other teams off the coast of Brazil, or the person studying the Arctic Ocean off Alaska. All are from Africa. Surely she could phone from southern Utah. I had tried several times to contact her by email, but each had gone unopened. That was my sole way of interacting directly with her, and it didn't work. I didn't have her phone number. I then emailed the university to see if they could assist me reach her, but they were unhelpful. She wasn't communicating with them either. I was anxious about her safety. I told her I was worried about her. Her response to my assertion about having global easy access to communications with me was that I was gone. Thus, it made no difference. She stated she could take care of herself, so I shouldn't have worried. She couldn't comprehend how interested I was in her and her activities, despite the fact that I couldn't change anything. I don't think she tried very hard to notify me of her decision to stay longer. She wouldn't say anything about her living situation either. She did stay with one of the families while she was there. She had made some contacts during previous visits to the target town. That much I knew. Now she was typing furiously while ignoring me. Her justifications were that she needed to enter her findings onto a computer and organize it into thesis form. Her dissertation focused on a Mormon church split group. These groups resided in confined, rural, and secluded communal towns. Susan stated that little was understood from a scientific perspective. There were numerous charges and innuendos, but there was little genuine investigation into the community's inner workings. I believe I saw a scandal down there on the local news a few years ago, but I couldn't recall the details. I knew outsiders weren't welcome. Susan's research led her to one such isolated community. Her assignment called for only 1 month on site. She'd remained longer. She claimed why she stayed to finish her studies rather than returning at a later date. I questioned if my sense that they were a strictly closed, exclusive culture was incorrect. I wondered how Susan, as an outsider, had acquired access to them for such an extended length of time. Perhaps they'd made an exception for Susan. Did they realize she was there to research them? These questions perplexed me, and Susan refused to discuss anything related to her studies. She is truly dedicated to and working hard to obtain her PhD. I admire her for such qualities, but I also know she has changed dramatically since her return. She simply did not connect with me due to a lack of communication. I told her that. She became agitated, claiming that doctoral research is far more involved and demanding than most people realize. The evident connotation is that I am one of the non-understanding individuals. She refused to share any aspects of her 2-month stay with me further. She had shared her research project and technique with me before leaving. Why couldn't she share her findings with me now that she'd finished her research and made the necessary changes? She had to give her thesis committee everything, but she refused to discuss it with me. I felt isolated from this period of our recent history. The question seems simple and non-threatening to me, but she clearly saw it as such in some twisted sense of her logic. For the first time in our 5 years of marriage together, Susan seemed to be hiding something from me. Something major had happened, causing me ongoing friction and mounting strain. She simply remained silent about everything. She'd tell me that. She promised to tell me after I finished my thesis. This provided no comfort to me. Why not tell me now? The most prominent thing, and the first thing I observed upon my return, was simply too blatant to overlook. It was the way she dressed before to this. She dressed as a 26-year-old married lady would. Not too hot, not too conservative. She always loved to reveal some cleavage, but not too much. She has always worn skirts that were slightly above the knee length. She adored wearing jeans and pantsuits and looked beautiful in them. She realized she wasn't gorgeous, so she focused on using makeup to brighten her face, and it worked. She always wore perfume and makeup. Now she was dressed really conservatively. Her outfits were cut close to the neck and stretched to ankle length. During her first month back, she modified her outfit into even wilder clothes. Essentially, she was dressed in what I call tint dresses. Susan was anything but obese. She had a figure to die for, but her face features were significantly less appealing. However, things had changed. She now wore simple, uninteresting, longitudinally striped clothes. Gray or gray? Blue. God knows where she got these monstrous outfits, but she had them somehow. I did not like them at all. It did little to reveal her naturally lovely body, which she was proud of before to this. She currently doesn't wear perfume or lipstick. She, always had long, straight black hair that she brushed and let fall freely, well below her shoulders. Now she rolled it into a ball behind her head. Her presentation was nothing short of horrible. I told her this, but she didn't care about herself, her image, or how disappointed I was in her. Susan, thank you for showing me those curves down in the boonies. When will you return to the 21st century? I respect your performance, but it will be great to see you as you were. Your outfits are awful, your hair is even worse, and your body stinks. How could you do this to me? All she stated was that she wouldn't respond. She simply turned aside and retreated to her den. No mention of change was ever made. She never dressed decently again. To my understanding, I was constantly commenting negatively, nearly to the point of harassment. One time, following my derogatory remarks, she became irritated and stated that she had become accustomed to dress like the women there and actually preferred the looser clothing and more conservative dress style. It also helped her stay in the mood and mode of whatever she was wearing. While she documented her findings and worked on her thesis, I told her I didn't like it and would prefer it if she dressed like the rest of us in the outside world, since she recognized us as normal people. Now she resembled the images I'd seen in a magazine of communal wives in towns 200 years ago. Perhaps I saw the picture on an oatmeal jar. Anyway, I despised it, but she didn't care what I thought anymore. As far as I could tell, she was acting suspiciously. There was no difference at night. She would get into bed wearing a long, basic gray cotton nightgown. She refused to kiss me after we were in bed. Even the previously delightful touching of her gorgeous and appealing body was turned down day and night. Her body was off limits to me. "My husband," she would remark. "If I become aroused, I will be unable to resist going all the way with you. That would interfere with my feelings and memories, tainting my unique research." I kept trying, but no amount of appealing or requesting would make her return to the seductive girl she had once been. Finally, I got tired of being refused and turned my back on her in bed right away, avoiding the expected rebuke and rejection. I told her it felt as if we weren't married anymore. Even that elicited a bland response. She remained hooked to her computer. She rarely comes out of our door, which she has taken over. Her argument is that she wants to avoid anything that will contaminate her memory of her studies. This line of nonsense, as I called it to her face, really irritated me. She believed that discussing it would taint her study. She was communicating with her thesis professor. However, she would talk to him, but not to me. I was getting pretty upset. My house was no longer a home, but rather a source of irritation. The reason was that someone was living in it at my expense, both financially and emotionally. Can I do nothing about it? She was my wife, and I wanted her back. Frustration rose. Susan had apparently contracted a stomach ailment while on dash site. She had been sick for several days before returning home, and she was still sick now. She frequently felt nauseous, especially in the morning. She kept saltine crackers on her side of our queen-size marital bed. These appear to soothe her troubled tummy. Several times I asked her to see a doctor to find out what was wrong. She pledged to do so, but to my knowledge, she never did. After a few weeks, she felt better again. In fact, she looked terrific. I was only permitted to view her face and hands. She had warm, full pink cheeks, and her lips were so soft when she let me kiss her. After she recovered, she stated that there was no need to consult a doctor because her nausea had subsided and had not returned. I didn't see any reason to go either. After all, she was no longer sick. When I told a coworker about my wife's health, he suggested that hepatitis could have caused her upset stomach and asked if she had received all of her hepatitis injections. Acute hepatitis can resolve and then progress to chronic hepatitis, ending in liver failure. He had told me to send it on to Susan. We quote both had all of the vaccines suggested by the CDC. She never went yellow. I suggested she see a doctor to have blood tests to see whether she was immune or had an illness. She refused to leave. I feel okay now. She does some housework, but not much. Prior to her departure, she appeared to enjoy doing things around the house with me, such as eating. That is not the case now. She emphasizes the need of meeting a thesis deadline if she hopes to graduate this spring. She'd been working on this for several years. That appears on her degree. She had not explicitly declared an urgent desire to get her degree this year. The university has allotted her an additional 2 years. But the race to finish has taken over her life. She was determined to finish everything now. I told her that our relationship was deteriorating as a result of her sudden and obsessive focus on her thesis. She explained that the amount of work required to write a thesis had always been known to me. This is the finest and only time to finish. I couldn't understand why there was such a rapid surge. I asked her if her academic objectives had changed. If so, I may be able to understand. Her response was that she wanted to resume teaching in high school starting in the fall. She intended to have her terminal degree ready when she returned. This made some sense to me. I didn't understand why she went ahead and finished her reasoning. She already had a teaching credential. She also has 2 years left to complete her degree. So why did she suddenly get a major push? This unexpected burst of high-intensity activities was pushing our marriage to its limits. A PhD is not required for high school teaching. Only tenured university employment require this level of education. It did not make sense to me. Her explanations did not fully satisfy my curiosity. Previously, we were always careful to discuss all of our intentions before making decisions. She was avoiding our past hugging and sex sessions. These were the periods when we did the most intense sharing. Now she was making decisions that would influence our marriage. She hadn't even notified me, let alone discussed these to find out how I felt. I informed her that this was really concerning. She was making such a decision unilaterally without the typical husband-wife conversation. This behavior had a significant impact on our connection. I informed her that while I wasn't opposed to her returning to teach high school, she should have discussed it with me beforehand. I asked where she was applying for a teaching position. She insisted that she hadn't made that decision yet. There is only one high school in our little community. The next nearest is 30 kilometers away. Susan, as I mentioned, if you intend to teach here again, you should definitely speak with the principal or school board immediately. Any available post may be filled before you apply. She stated that she would do it at the appropriate moment, but she was too busy right now. First and foremost, she asked Susan, "Are you too busy to make even 1 or 2 phone calls to see whether a post was available this fall? We need to plan ahead. Would you like me to find out for you?" She made it quite clear that I should not become entangled in her affairs. She could do things on her own without my help. She stated definitively, "in my own time." Nothing seemed to matter to her anymore except finishing her thesis and earning a degree. I got the impression that she didn't regard herself or me as vital parts of each other's life. This attitude of forcing me out of her decision-making process concerns me. Did she not comprehend what an important element she is to us? Her judgments would have an impact on me, yet I lacked the ability to vote. Time appears to go on without me. We resumed our shallow conversation and talked briefly about her odd need and ardent desire to get her degree as soon as possible. Her stomach stopped troubling her, and her health recovered, but our marriage continued to suffer. We became increasingly distant. I had a demanding work as a research geologist. My days were filled with meetings, reports, and visits to the home office. I had another country vacation to arrange. Susan wouldn't discuss future dates or plans. We'd always planned my trips with her. I could no longer make plans based on her input. Our life together was falling apart. My life was intriguing and cheerful except for my failing home situation with my wife. We swayed along quite precariously. I kept my emotional and physical distance from her. She was immersed in another universe where I had no place. I was not invited into her new world. In fact, just the contrary. I was both explicitly and implicitly excluded. My anxiety grew. I began experiencing stomach discomfort. My doctor prescribed a stomach acid inhibitor, but it was only partially effective. Anxiety was wrenching my intestines apart, not acid. I need to order my life. I despise surprises. I need things to be discussed. We agreed and carefully prepared. Sure, we need contingency plans, but they have to be part of the preparation. My wife was now transforming my life into a haze of uncertainty. I don't do well with simply going with the flow and letting things happen. Was my darling wife ditching me for her valuable academic career? All of this felt very superfluous to me. How long could I withstand uncertainty? I was afraid I would crash at any point. We both avoided alcohol and drugs, so I turned to playing and practicing my cello to relieve my emptiness, loneliness, and rejection. In short, I was miserable. I couldn't even tell when it was all going to end. Supper is served in the evening. I would constantly inquire about her progress that day and her everyday activities. I made this a point while I was gone for the day. Our chats were always superficial and uninteresting. One evening, when she was on site conducting research, I decided to look into her living arrangements again. "Susan, what were the specifics of your living arrangements? Did you have a separate bedroom?" I probed Ethan. She only used my formal name when she was annoyed. "How many times do I need to tell you? I'll tell you everything once I'm done with my thesis. Now stop making my life more difficult when I already have so much to do. Please don't ask me again." Susan virtually shrieked her response at me. "Damn it, Ethan, you're really making me mad with all of these inquiries when you know I won't answer them until my PhD is confirmed. I quote V told you that many times. But you will not leave it alone. Please get off my back about this. You know why I'm stressed out. I'm attempting to complete this thesis. You're bothering me. Just slows me down." She went away in an exaggerated, stilted gait, gazing over her shoulder. She spat out, "You've got me angry, and I won't be able to concentrate on my thesis tonight. She disappeared into our personal lair and locked me out. She'd said those exact words a few evenings ago. My patience was getting thin very quickly. My attitude toward her got more aggressive. My rage was no longer disguised. Nevertheless, I had to be comfortable with no wife and no knowledge of her life. Time passed, and the days became into weeks, then months. I simply couldn't understand. Creeping fears of a future marriage disaster infiltrated my head, ripping open sores on my psyche. "Would you have similar issues to mine?" Her regular and formulaic response was always unexpected. Changes in my methods have caused me to change many things. She did mention I had gotten some completely fresh information that required considerable and important revisions. Everything seemed to need to be revised and addressed with my thesis committee. The modifications have made everything more complicated for me. "Susan, couldn't you tell me what this new information was? What exactly were these unanticipated changes that demanded so much of your attention? You know, the ones that exclude me from your life. Sweetheart, if I may call you that. How did you obtain the new and revealing facts you mentioned? Surely you can tell me. Your trustworthy hubby." Her response indicated that she was concerned, that if she told me all the specifics, I would become very emotional. I might become enraged with the individuals in my family and community. My emotional comments would have a negative impact on her ability to report her own feelings and experiences. Understanding any of this eluded me completely. I couldn't give a shit for those individuals. I already detested what I knew about their polygamous relationships. How could her telling me more about their family and communal life make me feel any more disgusted or elicit any additional fury or emotional response? I was already exhausted just thinking about their unusual lifestyle. I was relieved that these individuals were isolated in a remote corner of nowhere. I didn't want anything to do with them. I guess I was starting to despise them. They had stolen my sensual wife and transformed her into a monster. My rage and frustration rose over her apparent unneeded secrecy. She adhered to her reasons, and I stayed with my anxiety. I joked with her that I would only become emotional if she had participated in their polygamy rather than simply observed it. She would not respond. She claimed to have obtained the information using her intelligence and unusual technique. Her explanation left me with more questions than answers, and it certainly increased my stress levels. I explained that her refusal to reveal her actions was more unpleasant and a source of anger and irritation for me than if she had been completely honest and told me everything. Anyway, that's how I see the situation. Everything will be revealed and discussed in detail at the appropriate time, which is quickly approaching. We had disagreed. It, quote, "s" now been around 5 months since I returned. She refused to have sex with me. Our sex life had not just degraded, it had died. We haven't had sex since the day before we went. After that gentle and pleasurable sex, we slept in each other's arms. We swore again our love and fidelity. We had fantastic sex 3 or 4 times a week prior to this incident. Our sex was always sweet, loving, and mutually satisfying. She provided suggestions about how I could delight her more. I've always done this. I made requests of her, and she always obliged. We didn't want anything to do with sex while we were married. We both appreciated the teasing and foreplay involved in romantic encounters. We had hug sessions following sex. We frequently went for a second bout before retiring for the night. I really miss all of this. I couldn't understand how depriving me, her confidential life partner and beloved husband, of my due access to her body could contaminate her study. I started to wonder what all of her research included. If sex with her husband could taint her research, it seemed reasonable that sex would have been part of it. We had decided and pledged during our marriage that monogamy would be important to us. We'd agreed countless times to be faithful. I was doing my part by turning down numerous possibilities, both domestically and internationally. Susan and I even discussed how these communities practiced multiple wife families before she left on her study trip. We had joked that she might become a 3rd or 4th wife for study purposes. I had stressed to her how repulsive those actions were. She understood that I could never live that way. I also remember telling her that while listening to the spouses was one thing, experiencing that position would be completely unacceptable to me. She agreed completely before leaving. I had implicitly trusted her since I was confident in her loyalty to me before she left for southern Utah. I had no reason to be fearful or suspicious, neither infidelity nor her research methods. I felt very comfortable permitting her to make a solo visit to the neighborhood she had chosen, but suddenly our sexual life was ended. Why wouldn't she have sex with me anymore? We did kiss and renew our vows of eternal love for each other, but she forbade sexual contact and refused to allay my suspicions of her infidelity. Aside from a few less than polite kisses, her body has been off limits since she returned. She had moved my books and computer to a corner of the large dining room and purchased several large bookcases and file cabinets. These neatly matching bookcases were placed next to my computer desk in the dining room. She effectively shifted my work into the dining room. I had a lot of research findings to compile into reports for my company's leaders. She could and did lock me out after a few days. I simply asked her if she had engaged in any sexual behavior that could jeopardize our marriage. If she had kept her promises of sexual fidelity in our marriage, she would have become extremely hostile and defensive. Then, in an angry outburst, she declared that she would not discuss anything about her research until her dissertation was completed and accepted by the university. I was not supposed to ask her again. Now I knew I had a major marital issue. There's no denying it now. Do you agree? I actually expressed my rage and outrage. It was unusual for her to be gone for 2 months without reassuring me that she had been faithful to me and our marriage. Her body language and facial expressions indicated that this was a highly sensitive and emotional issue for her. Nonetheless, she maintained her secrecy. I told her I could see that my questions elicited emotional responses that she claimed she wanted to avoid. It appears that her secrecy caused more emotional turmoil than simply sharing, that is, assuming there is nothing serious to hide. My concerns were almost out of control. My stomach was rumbling and in constant turmoil. I began to look forward to going to work and regretted having to return to my own home. She was home for me, but she was not mine. She appeared to be one of her degree-seeking peers. How would you feel? She and I have a generally happy marriage, or at least we had, and maybe we will in the future. I wondered if other marriages suffered as much as ours did while one partner was working on a thesis. I had not heard of it, but I was aware that her doctoral thesis must have been a massive undertaking. Her self-imposed time constraints made matters worse. Susan, after one discouraging and angry encounter, I had had enough. I exclaimed angrily, "It appears that you have destroyed our sharing, confidentiality, and trust. I believe our marriage is very similar to past experiences for us, and you are completely to blame." I kept berating her for everything she did to me. Finally, I stomped out and drove around aimlessly, hoping that the cool night air would calm me down. As I drove around, I tried to put my thoughts before my emotions. She has told me that she loves me and hopes that I will love her back. I kept assuring her that I still loved her, but I despised the way she treated me. Communication is essential in any relationship, and she is unwilling to discuss many aspects of her life with me right now. She will not reassure me of her marital fidelity. Why did she engage in an affair? Did she do more sexual things in order to complete her research? All I knew was that this was putting a huge strain on both me and my marriage. Do I have to prepare for being single again? My mind couldn't get out of the tangle of my anxiety and emotional turmoil. I was determined that this turmoil would come to an end as soon as possible. If she didn't end it, I would. I considered the agony of moving out and going on with my life without her. I couldn't imagine life without her. I decided not to ask her anymore, but to find out what I could on my own. Perhaps someone at the university could help me. But who? I began to reflect more and more looking back. I began to summarize for myself the changes I had seen and experienced. Her strange dress and lack of makeup were more than just art. Her not using her favorite perfume was not like the Susan I knew. Her unwillingness for sex almost 5 months was most worrisome. I resented the abrupt shifts in her conduct. I was even beginning to loathe the one I had loved. From then on, she displayed additional interest in what I did or how I felt. There was no hugging, teasing, or sex that night or any subsequent night. Naturally, that drew around a lot of tension on my behalf, not even considered the indignation for her disrespectful actions. I began a new manner of dealing with her, a style that was disagreeable, distressing, anxiety-generating, and gradually barrier-building. I avoided questioning her about anything. Routinely, she locked the door as she was typing. Therefore, I had less opportunity to address her. This was something new. I had never been locked out of anywhere in my house. She had a headgear with microphone and earphones. She claimed this was needed to speak with her primary professor at substantially less expenditure than by phone. Her university was only about a mile from my headquarters, closer to the city's eastern edge. She also stated that she communicated frequently with her professor via email. Despite the fact that she lived only 50 miles from college, I had to agree that email was cheaper and faster than physical mail. This all made sense to me, except for why I was locked out until she turned off her computer. That aroused my suspicion. I informed her that I was really uncomfortable with her excluding me from her life the way she did. She would smile and tell me that she couldn't have any hindrance while conducting her studies. I could only understand a little of that. I had lingering doubts. I informed her that I thought she was not being as transparent with me as we had always agreed. She disregarded my concerns as insignificant and nothing to worry about. Her refusal to be open, followed by her statement that it was not essential, was completely dissonant. Our marriage is very new. I really took off. Vincent informed her that Susan continued to downplay it, despite my strong protests. Another alteration had happened. She now kept everything on her computer password-protected dot. When I asked her about it, she became enraged at me for prying around on her computer. "You have your own computer, so you don't need to fool around with mine," was her normal response. She became quite upset about it. I guess academics are worried about their scientific identities. I saw no need to be excited if she had nothing to hide, dot. When I told her that, she became enraged and accused me of distrusting her. She warned me that deleting something by accident could jeopardize her study. I asked her if she backed up her files every few hours in case the machine crashed. Susan didn't respond, but simply turned aside, suggesting that the talk was ended. Why was her research so private? I was not going to notify anyone or let anyone else know about her results. That is still her research. She will not compromise on the secrecy issue. In fact, my anxieties were contributing to a big problem for me. She refused to admit any marital problem, or any problem for that matter. She was only close to me. Too much had changed, dot. We simply weren't communicating as we used to. That was my main concern. The absence of sharing overshadowed everything else. There was an intangible barrier of distrust growing on my behalf. I told her, and she dismissed it as nothing. But that meant everything to me. I attempted to tell her this, but it didn't seem to sink in, dot. Something about her had changed dramatically. I could detect and see it. It was brutally obvious to me. Susan. I told her how much you'd changed since going out on your research project. I was being emphatic. Her responses were all the same typical crap. She would just explain that she needed to finish her study. She had worked long and hard for her degree, and it was now just a few months away, dot. She told me that everything would be okay very soon. "Susan," I replied, "I need to be your husband now. I need you as my wife right now, not in some unknown future period. When is this future time? When will we become a relationship again? Tell me." "Susan, honey, please hold on." She acknowledged that her dissertation was the most tough. She informed me that the research had taken an unexpected turn, whatever that meant. The adjustment hampered her research, necessitating an extra month and more time on the computer to reorganize her thesis and defense. She refused to give me an exact time limit for when this weird behavior would return to normal. She would reassure me that her thesis was almost finished. Then she'd go back into her sealed room. Real reassurance that satisfied me was not forthcoming. I'd never distrusted her before, but I'd never had reason to. My fears about what had transpired grew. I was growing more skeptical and worried. Throughout this time, I commuted back and forth to the main office in the big metropolis. It was a wonderful journey to and from. The roads were in excellent condition, and the city streets were so broad that traffic was never an issue when not commuting. I was either examining reams of data or working on my computer to enter our research findings. Reporting seemed to be an ongoing process. Sometimes I just surfed or took out my cello to perform on one of my several 50-mile excursions to the main office. I suggested to my supervisor that we establish computer-to-computer voice communications between the home office and the various field units, including those of us who commuted to work. This suggestion was approved, and I received the passwords. Following installation, this reduced the need for less necessary but time-consuming journeys. As a result, I had more time at home. It was time to work out and practice the cello. I also mentioned to my boss the changes in my wife's behavior since she returned. He advised I talk to her primary professor at the university across town, as she worked closely with him. That seemed like an excellent concept. It also aligned with my earlier thoughts. I immediately called his office and spoke with the department secretary. She scheduled an appointment for me a few days later on Thursday of that week. I instructed the secretary to inform him that it was for my wife's PhD dissertation, and to please not tell her that I was coming to talk with him. She told me that all of his appointments were secret. I drove home that evening feeling a little better because my issues were piling up and I was beginning to seek outside assistance. I decided to solve some internal mysteries. The first item on my list was to check our bank accounts, savings accounts, and credit cards for odd spending. These were easily accessible from my computer while my wife was using hers. The only strange thing was that she was not charged for 8 weeks while conducting research in southern Utah. Perhaps I wondered if she had a university account from which she could withdraw award funds. The lecturer could enlighten me on this. When we met, she had credit charges for the bus ride down and back. There were no other credit card transactions or withdrawals. Similarly, no cash was removed from our shared accounts before we left. The second item on my agenda was to invade her privacy on her computer. I didn't know how to do this. A short phone call to our resident techie computer guru in the home office resolved the issue. He claimed it would be much quicker and faster for him to bring the required programs, and he would conduct the searches for me. He was confident he could accomplish in 2 minutes what it would take me 2 weeks to do. We both chuckled, and he promised it wouldn't take long. Maybe in a few minutes? More than 2 minutes. I knew he was right and set up a consultation fee. I met my geek friend for lunch on my way to the home office the next day. I wanted to know him a little better. During our lunch talk, he said that he had worked for the FBI's identity theft branch. As a result, he had several contacts in the FBI, as well as extensive knowledge of identity concerns. He liked being an electronic Sherlock Holmes. Now, his job was very different. He was in charge of business security, which included background checks, monitoring, and securing the study findings of our geologists. Like the one I was in charge of, and sent to the home office. Next, we wanted a time when my wife would be gone for a few hours. I despised feeling like I had to search around to get information that Susan should have easily shared with me. Her disappearance was not long in coming. Susan quickly informed me that she needed to meet with her thesis committee the next week. She, almost finished her thesis. She'd be gone all day Tuesday. That was the Tuesday after. I'd have an appointment with her major professor on the previous Thursday, which was the day after tomorrow. I called my geek friend, and he agreed to travel down that Tuesday morning. Nothing has changed. There was no sex, no meaningful kisses, and no indication that she disliked or avoided me other than what was already common. All I got from her was a blank slate for engagement and communication. What had become frequent was that she would not show me even the silhouette of her attractive body. She was constantly dressed in an oversized opaque robe, full-length tank dress, or nightgown. She didn't even wear the jeans she had admired so much. Oh well, I decided, I'll be patient for a while longer while I acquire more information. I'm going to approach her soon and push her to tell me everything, or I'll divorce her. Fortunately, we hadn't had any children. I met Professor Young in his spacious third-floor office. He was quite friendly and at ease. He offered me a drink of water, which I received with a grin and appreciation for his time. It appears that his religion forbids tea and coffee. It meant nothing to me. Several inquiries were directed at the professor. First, I confirmed that he was my wife's major lecturer and key thesis advisor. Despite the fact that he is the department chair, he served as chair of her thesis committee. Being chair is an administrative, not academic post. Second, I discovered that my wife had an account set up to cover research expenses. However, she was required to submit receipts for reimbursement or travel mileage on her vehicle. No, he had no idea if she had reported any expenses, but his secretary could receive a detailed accounting in minutes. He phoned his secretary over the intercom and instructed her to prepare my wife's magnificent account for later delivery to me. I queried him about her claim that her study had taken an unexpected turn, necessitating extensive adjustments to her thesis. He stood and glanced out the window for a moment before responding. This was true. There were some unexpected events. Yes, she had adopted unconventional methods, but her circumstances necessitated the modifications. Susan and I should discuss what this all entails. He did not want to be the one to tell me about it. I informed him that she would not reveal that with me, but had promised to do so if her PhD was secured. Yes, he said, her changes required significant alterations, but all of the committee members had shown strong support for her research. Susan's real on-site time appeared to be little longer now that it was completed. However, such discrepancies are common in doctoral-level research. You shouldn't read too much into such a time extension. The committee would not have accepted her methods outright. He gazed out the window, not at me. Finally, he turned and spoke as a parent and husband, not as a professor. I need to advise you that you and Susan must have an in-depth and sensible talk about everything that happened while she was conducting her research. He was confident that we would have a lot to ponder as a pair. He emphasized the need of forgiveness in marriage and urged that I practice a lot of it. My fear and skepticism grew enormously. I told him she was meeting with her thesis committee next week and hoped everything went well so she could return to normal with me. He informed me he had reviewed her study multiple times. Her committee presentation and following final orals would most likely go well. He expected no academic problems from the committee. He stated that he believed her degree would be issued this spring. I informed him of her ultra-conservative dress. He had previously noted it and appeared amused. He believed she was going a little crazy by identifying with her research community, but I shouldn't make too much of it. His attempts to allay my anxieties were ineffective. I asked if she had used her audio setup to communicate with him or other committee members. He answered, "Of course." They were installed on all of the computers used by instructors and graduate students. Certainly, computer-based voice communication was common and inexpensive. Outside of formal group sessions, she was not permitted to communicate with any of her thesis committee members. The next one was scheduled for next week. I only had one more question for him. Was he aware of her living circumstances while she was on site? I knew there were no motels within 10 or so miles, and she hadn't taken her car. She was unable to commute. He said she will submit and defend all of her results and methodology to the committee next week. Her living arrangements would undoubtedly be part of her final presentation. From his perspective, she had complete freedom to tell me whatever she wanted. He was not free to discuss personal matters like that without her permission. He found it strange and peculiar that she had instructed him not to tell me about her living conditions. He did not have any personal or intellectual interests. Susan and I talked about it. He was clearly aware of my worry. He told me that PhD applicants were virtually always concerned about keeping their research confidential until the committee cleared it for publication. He went on to explain that her complete secrecy toward me was certainly exceptional. I prepared to depart by thanking him. He asked more about my academic background. When he learned about my summa cum laude graduation from a prestigious university in Colorado, as well as my following master's degree, he pushed me to seek my own PhD at his university. The chair of the geology department was a close friend of his, thus he was always seeking for highly qualified individuals. I sensed the recruitment and thanked him, but I knew that if one PhD dissertation could stress our marriage the way hers had, another would undoubtedly kill us as a pair. He grinned and added that not every candidate finds their research as challenging or as personal as Susan's. We shook hands and parted amicably. As I was leaving, his secretary handed me a dossier detailing my wife's financial account activities over the previous year. She informed me that this was sensitive information and should not be discussed with anybody other than my wife. The secretary was certain my wife had her account. Susan had already filed all of this information online as I drove back home, so it was all recorded on her computer. My head was whirling with concern. My suspicions had increased dramatically. Professor Young had done little to relieve my worries. In fact, based on our talk, my worry seemed reasonable. Still, there was no evidence of cheating. The likelihood appeared to be increasing and was strongly suggestive of that possibility. Nevertheless, concealing seemingly harmless information from me and forcing me to draw my own conclusions led in distrust and paranoia. There was still no conclusive evidence of infidelity. When I got home, I put the folder in my desk drawer until I was in the mood. I needed more workout than my cello. I didn't mention my journey to see her, Professor. This was the first time I had concealed some vital information from her. I felt horrible since I was now involved in this dishonesty of sharing. I hated doing that, but I couldn't find a way to reveal it without showing my hand too soon. We talked about small nothings. I was becoming increasingly anxious about how our marriage was going. She wanted me to appreciate the incredible pressure she was under. I told her it was her own fault. She disagreed. I informed her that her long skirts, hesitation to show me her body, and refusal to have sex led me to suspect she had been unfaithful in some way. Those habits might have nothing to do with her academic goals. It was becoming a serious concern for me, and it was wearing my nerves out. Susan, this has to change, or our marriage will end. It's already in serious trouble. She only scowled and gave me her stern, artificial smile, which I knew was forced. My heart was broken. She stated that if the committee approved her thesis next Tuesday, she would tell me everything. She showed sorrow for my anxiety. She did not express regret for being the cause. She turned and went into her closed room. I fell into despair. Finally, it was Tuesday. She got up early, and to my surprise, she was dressed in her normal long, drab dress, her hair carefully tied into the traditional bun behind her head. Even for such an important event as presenting and defending her thesis, she dressed in such dreadful apparel. It seems to me that her clothing was even more crucial for her thesis defense. She was not physically gorgeous, but I knew she could be considerably more so in current clothing and makeup. Susan. I expressed significant worry. You absolutely should dress up for this occasion. You consider something to be really significant. Don't you recognize that your appearance is an important aspect of your presentation? People will assess you not only on your research, but also on your whole presentation. This includes your clothing. My appearance at work was crucial, even if I wasn't a candidate. Ethan, you don't know social studies professors. You earth science majors and business people may believe that formal attire is necessary on formal occasions like these, but social studies professors couldn't care less. You should observe how some of the female faculty dress. Are they married to men? I inquired scornfully. She gave me the arrogant academician look before leaving. I was able to wish her well. I called my geek friend to confirm she had left. He was prepared to leave, armed for bear, as he phrased it. He arrived with several tiny bags and containers filled with plug-ins and other electronic gadgets, as well as several discs. We sat at my wife's PC. I provided him with all of the information he requested, including his name, social security number, mother's maiden name, birth date, etc. He read her email in less than 2 minutes. He told me he was going to copy all of her emails to a disk so I could read over them later. He finished that in roughly 5 seconds. Then he delved into her hard drive, opening each file individually into sub-files and sub-sub-files, all of which were password secured. But his program provided us all of her passwords. He copied everything to disks. He then entered into her memory, which is where the computer saves information. I didn't realize there was anything. He went into the hard drive and copied everything on every site she had visited. He duplicated her erased files. He claimed he could duplicate every keystroke she had ever done. Her hard disk has so much memory capacity that I could save everything. He created numerous hard disks. He then browsed through her previously erased files, the ones we believe are gone when we delete them. He also saved these to her hard disk because she had a lot of space on there. He was able to recover everything she had deleted during the previous 2 years when she upgraded her hard drive. Finally, he removed all proof that her computer had been hacked. He smiled as he copied everything to backup disks. I asked him why we needed 2 copies, and he said that 1 copy may always be lost or stolen. The information would be safe if I had a backup copy of everything on her PC, even if someone discovered the set I kept at home. He recommended a bank deposit box. We didn't look into each file, just saved it. I knew there had to be something truly horrible on the disks, something that might destroy our marriage. I thanked him and handed him a lovely personal check. I went to the bank and hired a deposit box in my name solely, where I deposited the backup disks for safekeeping. My wife arrived after evening, having dined in the city, and called to instruct me to get a hamburger for dinner. When she arrived, she appeared to be joyful. I asked her how her thesis critique went. She grinned and said everything went much better than she expected. Her thesis was accepted for publishing by the University Academic Council. This is the university's official publications unit. The committee decided to perform her final orals as well. She has finally finished all of the academic prerequisites for her degree. She was ecstatic. There would be no more problems. Everyone concerned had reassured her. She was nearly dancing. "See?" she exclaimed with joy. "I told you so." The way I dressed had nothing to do with the quality of my study or the presentation. I congratulated her again and over. She had completed an extremely arduous task. She simply had to wait until May's convocation to obtain her coveted PhD. I offered high compliments and congrats. When I tried to hug and kiss her, I felt like giving her a big hug. She turned away from me. "I still can't kiss you as we used to," she muttered. "What the hell is this about?" I inquired. Your degree is insured, your research is completed, you hold a state high school teaching license. You have accomplished everything you have ever set your mind to. Now is the moment to refocus your thoughts and emotions on making our marriage what it once was." She drew away. "We can never go back," she remarked. "What the hell is this about?" I asked. "We don't need to go back. We have to move forward." She stepped back. "This day has been both a source of anxiety and excitement for me. I still have unfinished business with the grant. Before we talk about anything else, you are causing Susan to be delayed. And for no reason, I accused her. You're dragging me along. What is happening? No sex, no hugging, and no sharing. No love," I shouted at her. "Are we done? I cannot take any more of this. Are you leaving me or am I leaving you?" She glanced at me, displaying both sadness and irritation. "One more week, please, Ethan," she said. "The financial aspect of my grant, as well as the payment of final graduation costs, must be addressed. Then we'll have the long-awaited discussion and sharing session. Everything will become perfectly obvious." Then I became quite angry. "Do you have a computer? Everything can be completed electronically in a few minutes, but you want another entire stinking week." This sparked another furious disagreement. I ended up accepting this last delay. I couldn't change her mind, sweetheart. There will be no further delays after this. If you try to pull this bullshit on me again, the only delay will be the time it takes me to find a divorce attorney. Don't get me wrong, I despise divorce, but this stuff has to stop. What you are putting me through is worse than a divorce. Every day is like living in hell. This is similar to selecting the petals of buttercups. She loves me. She does not love me. I don't think you love me that much. I won't waste any more time picking petals and wondering if you love me. You simply could not love, trust, and treat me as you have in the last 5 months. I went out for a long walk to attempt to calm down. I was really irritated. Down deep, enraged, I told her that I would be returning when I got back. As I walked in the cool evening air, she sat on the couch, seemingly in a state of mental struggle. I knew I was nearing my breaking point. On the other hand, the last delay provided me an extra week to evaluate her university grant account and the computer files I now acquired. Without her knowing, I may be ready for bear in less than a week. That night was challenging for me. I had difficulty sleeping. I tossed and turned. Susan also appeared to have trouble sleeping. I woke her up numerous times by thrashing around, but she quickly fell back asleep. I attempted to relax down and eventually fell into a noxious slumber. I awakened early the next morning, my arm resting softly on her abdomen. She was lying on her back, breathing quietly in deep sleep as I moved my hand. She didn't move. My hand moved to her lower abdomen. It had regularly appeared before. It felt like an age since I'd touched her body. I lowered my hand slowly southward, easing lightly down so as not to wake her, but rather to feel her. It always felt smooth and sensual. It heightened my early morning exhilaration. Something was very strange. Her belly was always flat when she lay on her back. Now there was a smooth, perceptible bump. My interest was quickly piqued as I examined and felt her belly more closely. The thought that sprang to mind nearly made me unglued. This abdominal growth was smooth and rounded at the top. Really? It was almost to her navel. She hadn't awoke, so it couldn't have been tender. I withdrew my hand in terror. Now her secrecy made sense. Her morning sickness, which she had come home with but had eventually cleared up, made sense. She was pregnant. The child could not have been mine because she was using birth control pills at the time we split. Now, I remembered that I hadn't seen her birth control pills since she returned. She usually left them out alongside her toothbrush and cosmetics. The cosmetics, of course, were gone. She did not use them anymore. It wasn't until now that her decision to stop taking birth control pills made sense. She didn't need them. She was already pregnant and carrying another man's baby. My anger took over. I violently shook her awake. She screamed in fear. I kept shaking her, releasing my pent-up rage. What had overtaken me? I was not a violent person, but my rage had gotten the better of me. She was crying and attempting to get out of bed to escape from me. I gripped her tightly and bit in rage. I jumped out of bed and stood over her. I jerked her up to a sitting position. She was bleary-eyed and half asleep. "Damn it!" I yelled. "I'm going to tell you the whole truth right now. You are pregnant with another man's child. This secrecy is over right now. No more delays. I'm as angry as a rocket hornet's nest. You no longer have a husband in this house. You need to tell me everything, and it should be everything. I've had it. I yelled and shook her shoulders. Your last time extension expired. Go put some real clothes on your pregnant belly. Wash your face. Take a shower. If possible, try to forget about your infidelity. See if you can find some guilt to be sorry about. You're going to talk and confess. I stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the walls shook. I made coffee to keep my hands occupied. I wondered if I could keep my anger under control. Susan. I yelled down the hall to her. When I am ready, I will invite you to the table. You will obey me. I'm done being Mr. Good Guy. Do not reveal yourself until I command. I was shocked at myself. I was shaking in fear and anger. I knew this was the worst day of my life. I walked around the kitchen doing nothing except staring at the gurgling coffee maker. I was in a state of shock, collapsing in a chair. I just tried to die, but it didn't work. Reality was still there. I pinched myself, but didn't wake up. I got up, grabbing a glass, and threw it at the back door, smashing it into 10,000 shards and destroying the glass in the door. I felt worse. I was trying to be rational, but it wasn't working. She had been right on at least that point. When I finally knew the truth, my emotions were going to ruin our life together, mine certainly, and probably hers. Pouring a cup of coffee. I drank it rapidly. It burned my lips and tongue as it went down. I didn't care. Maybe if my tongue burned. I couldn't say the things my mind was thinking about her. Finally, I cooled down a bit, finished serving the coffee and the toast, and called loudly and angrily my soon-to-be ex-wife to the table. She was dressed as usual in that awful drab tint dress. She was somber and told me she was scared of me. I told her she better go put on something decent. She deserved the whipping of a lifetime, but I wasn't up to administering it. She had to look decent for this important meeting with me. I was no damned social scientist, academician. She was to get dressed properly. I just knew our marriage was over. I saw no hope anymore. This was the last straw. My heart was broken and hardening against her. I had dreaded this moment, hoping against hope that it would not occur. I had plucked the last petal, and it was a she loves me not petal. The innocence of that childhood game of picking petals crashed over me. The tsunami of all fears crashed over me. My death had been confirmed. I could not avoid a confrontation with her now. It was upon me, here and now, and I had to deal with it. I didn't expect her to be of much use except to tell me what had transpired down there. She ran to our bedroom and quickly emerged in a nightgown with a robe wrapped over her. My previous clothes don't fit me anymore, so this is all I have to wear for you now. She was solemn as she whispered those words in obvious terror. She then sat silently, quite somber and appearing extremely fatigued, staring at the wall behind me. I didn't care. Did you know you were pregnant? I asked. Yes, I conducted a home test the day I got back and it was positive. So you knew and wouldn't tell me? You hid it from me. Is that right? Yes. I just couldn't deal with it then. Abortion was out of the question for me. I had to complete my thesis. The biggest cause of the need for getting it all done right immediately was that I knew I was going to have to deal with you about my pregnancy and our marriage. I needed my degree in the case you threw me out, or I decided to leave you. Last night. I decided to begin talking to you today about everything that happened down there. I wasn't going to take the week you handed me. Well, this is a damn fine moment to start. Right now, I'm incredibly angry at you. Perhaps I understand why you were in such a hurry to finish your thesis, but you lied to me, and that hurts terribly. You never lied to me before. So you've learned how to deceive, commit adultery, and destroy a marriage. You certainly learned a lot during your research. I spit on the table between us, leaving hubby in despair. Is this what I get from you, PhD? My rage got the better of me. I was infuriated. I had never been so enraged. I felt ashamed of myself. And she was also shaming me. You were correct, Susan. My rage would have boiled over earlier. Your thesis and degree may also have been postponed or be in significant peril. She simply sat there staring at the wall or the floor and fidgeting with her hands. So get on with it. I let out a growl. Evan, this is pretty complicated. Let me tell you that I believe my pregnancy was the result of an assault. Actually, the assaults began a week after I was taken in. Of course, I can't say exactly when the pregnancy began because I've had numerous forced and later voluntary sexual relations with Henry. He is the head of the household. Nobody defines him. Henry and I had sex for the entire 2 months I spent there. He threatened to assault me if I did not submit, so I had to submit. I couldn't find a way to depart. His other spouses kept a tight eye on me. I couldn't slip out because the sheriff is his brother, Dot. They would have contacted him first, then returned me, and I would have undoubtedly been beaten, assaulted, and tied up until I submitted. I had no choice. She began sobbing. My rage suddenly subsided somewhat. If she'd been assaulted, the scenario would have been very different. I'd heard stories about things like this happening before, but I never believed them. Such low-life folks simply did not exist in America. Now, I had scientific proof that at least one existed. I secretly meant to pursue vengeance, but right now, I needed my wife to tell me everything. I'm sorry you were assaulted. I struck a conciliatory tone. However, that does not explain why you will not have marital relations with me. Even worse, it doesn't explain your subsequent intentional sexual contacts with him, your clothing choices, or your secrecy. There must be more to this than just the assault. Keep chatting. I placed a firm order. This marriage is still on the rocks, but it has not ended. You're at least partially redeeming yourself. She continued to cry. I wasn't sure if her heart was suffering or that she had been caught too soon. I hoped it was both. I am trying to tell you something, Ethan. This is so challenging right now. I had intended to make this a 3-part series of debates that would lead to where we are today. But you derailed my best plans to begin telling you today in an organized manner. Now I have to work backwards from where I had planned to start telling you. Please allow me to begin where I planned to start. I promise to tell you everything. Just follow the order I've carefully planned. She stared at me. Her eyes begged with me, and my heart gave in. I had a difficult time loathing her. Okay, you need to tell me everything, and it has to include everything now. No. The 3-part item lasted around 3 weeks. It has to happen right now. It's everything right now. Is this clear? Yes. I promise everything today. Susan, before you go any further, I must inform you that I have been snooping around. I've talked to your major professor. I have a copy of everything on your computer. I can look at everything you mentioned. You have one and only chance to be honest with me. I'm going to record this chat from now on so I don't get things muddled up later. With that, I went to my desk and grabbed my tape recorder and numerous recordings, the microphone, and an electrical cord. I positioned the microphone and recorder on the table between us and turned them on. I called my supervisor and took the rest of the day off. I switched off the house phone. I will not be interrupted by phone calls. Neighbors weren't expected either. Give me your cell phone, Susan. She went to get it from her den. I turned it off and kept it in my pocket. Then I switched mine off and placed it in my other pocket. Susan started her story. Let me tell you where I came from. I've never told you that. And you've never made a real inquiry. I haven't wanted to discuss it. I have not been dishonest with you about it or anything else, that is, until I started being secretive in the last 5 months. My mother was the 4th wife of one of these families, including the one I researched in southern Utah. She became really unhappy at one time about her and their lifestyles. She almost fled with me when I was only 11. Even I grew up in an ideal family down there. My mother decided that that would not happen to me. I'm not sure where she learnt that wasn't a common occurrence in the outside world. One evening, she ran away with me. I remember it vividly. We left everything. We simply had the clothes that we were wearing. We discarded the tools we had been using in the fields many miles away from the house. It was getting dark, and the other wives and children were walking back when the rain began. They began to hurry and lost contact with me, and my mother. Mom grabbed me and fled down the country road in the opposite direction. I was afraid. We hurried and stumbled through the dark for 10 miles that night. We had to hide under a boxcar on a side at daylight, because she knew the sheriff would be hunting for us. Well, the boxcar was connected up, and we were off and free in a few hours. I recall how hungry and thirsty I was when the train eventually came to a stop. We jumped. We were at a highway intersection. A motorist picked us up and drove us to a Salvation Army women's shelter. We eventually ended up in Colorado. Mom obtained a job, an apartment, and I started school. We got it done. You and I met at university, along with the others. Mom never dated or remarried. She claimed she'd had enough of masculine dominance and humiliation at the hands of her all-powerful husband. Actually, she had never been formally married, At least in Utah, there is no record of her marriage. That makes me an illegitimate child in legal terms. Can we take a walk together and not talk about this for a few minutes? I agreed because my legs were also uncomfortable. Her narrative was fascinating, and my fury had subsided, but I knew there was more to come. During the fast stroll, she accepted my hand for the first time in months since she returned home. We returned to the house and sat at the table, staring at each other or into space. We now have a pitcher of cold water, some grapes and apples, and 2 glasses to keep our hands occupied, she explained. You can see how my academic interests were shaped by my upbringing. I wanted an adult perspective on living in that society. Now the more tough portion begins. Please listen as best you can. I know what comes next. Part 2 will be considerably more difficult for you to hear. I'll be as complete as I think you want. When I'm finished, you are welcome to ask any questions you may have, and I will respond thoroughly. I am not going to keep anything from you anymore. The time for withholding has passed, and the demand for complete honesty has arrived. She pushed back into her chair and took a sip of water. Ethan, I've carefully rehearsed this several times and now expect to get everything in order and correct in content. When I got to this village, the closest public transit option was a bus station about 10 miles away. Having been there before, I contacted an acquaintance who volunteered to drive me the last 10 miles to my destination, a town where I had buried a large sum of money near the bus station. I barely brought $1,000 in cash because I was afraid I would need it, just like my mother. I had my laptop, which I had previously programmed to access the internet. I couldn't utilize our home internet because it wasn't available down there. The family had initially agreed to accommodate me for a few days while I made preparations for the extended stay I required. You should be aware that the family I stayed with is related to my childhood family of origin. They were expecting me to return sometime. The town is familiar to me from my boyhood. I'd been there on preliminary scouting excursions, so I wasn't completely unknown. I knew my way about town and the countryside. Many people remembered me as a child, even though I had been gone for 15 years. Even then, my homecoming was treated with the same mistrust and distrust as any other outsider visiting the community. Gaining trust was critical for my research. As you are aware, these people have a profound and natural distrust of outsiders. I couldn't tell them I was on a study project because I would have been kicked out right away, even though I was family. I was met with mistrust, particularly by the family head. Henry had severe reservations about having me stay even overnight. His 3 wives were only slightly more welcoming at first. Even from the start, the 9 children reacted well to me. Rebecca, an 11-year-old girl, became quite close to me. We bonded fast, and I learned a lot from her. She provided me the child's perspective on their society. Her understanding brought up so many memories from my own youth. She was so frank about her feelings. I told her so much about the outer lives of youngsters her age. She was fascinated. She had to assure me that she would not tell anyone what I had told her about the outside world. On the first day, the man of the family greeted me at the roadside. Henry is his name. He is a tall man approaching the age of 50. He must be at least 6 feet 5 inches tall and weigh 260 pounds of muscle. He works the crops like the rest of the men. As a result, he is extremely strong and tough. He's extremely attractive. He wears a big beard. His hands are large and calloused from his hard work. His skin is heavily browned from the hot heat. His arms are hairy. I could see the hair on his chest above the collarless work shirt he was wearing. He was obviously an extremely strong man, physically, emotionally, and across countries. He is a man in complete control of his life and family. He is a man who will not be intimidated. He was accustomed to utmost obedience. No one else was permitted to meet visitors save the man of the home. We talked for a long time at the roadside before my buddies in the car were waved off to return to the outer world. I informed Henry that I intended to live happily among them for about a month, just like they do. This would allow us to assess if my return would be permanent. I had mentioned permanent so that I could stay for any amount of time and ingratiate myself with him. I had no intention of staying beyond the time required to complete my research. Henry told me very clearly that there were regulations that had to be followed without question, even if I was only there for one night. No murmurs or suggestions for adjustments will be permitted. I was specifically instructed not to speak highly of the outside world's children or marriages. That was a major sin in the community. He looked at my hands and my wedding band and told me that as part of his acceptance of me into his home, I needed to remove the rings. Reluctantly, I removed the ring. I informed him that I wanted to retain it, but would not wear it. He pushed me to give it to him. He promised to return it after I left. I had to agree or walk 10 miles back that night. He then inquired about what was in my backpack. I informed him that it held my clothes, personal items, and my computer. He refused to allow the computer. He seized it and rudely bashed it with a hole before throwing it in the garbage can at the back of the house. He snatched my purse and discovered $1,000. He understood this to mean that women were not allowed to have money in this town, let alone in his home. There would be nothing that might taint his home. Now I was delighted I had concealed cash in the flower bed next to the bus terminal. It was now brutally clear that I was going to be more imprisoned than free, because I needed to conduct the research and required his consent, understanding, and support. I agreed to all of his requirements for the future, as long as I was his guest, honey. She stared at me straight. The loss of my PC is the reason for my solitude at home. I had to retrieve all of the information from memory and enter it into my home computer. Everything hinged on my recalling what I would have otherwise documented on the computer. I wasn't certain I could remember everything. I needed to do a lot of calm pondering to remember things right. I had to recall not only facts, but also my emotional responses to life there. This was all part of my investigation. I was quite nervous about that, both down there and back here. Please attempt to comprehend that some of your anxiousness is now gone. But this was only a small part of my anxiousness. She continued, almost as if reading from a book. I committed to follow all of the rules of the community, his family, and his religion without raising any objections. In other words, I was not to interfere with their family life in any way that was relevant to my research. You may be asking why he made an exception for me, an outsider, to visit his home and stay in his town. The only reason I was permitted in was that Henry was a relative. Henry and I are only related by family relations, not by blood. He is 20 years my senior. I am the youngest child in that family. After my father died, Henry became the head of the family. The other wives had likewise died. Henry took his first wife, then 2 more in quick succession. M, 12 years younger than Henry's third wife. So I was finally invited inside the house and introduced to his wives and children. I was given a little bed in the attic with the other wives, just like all the other men of the household. Henry slept in the huge downstairs bedroom. The kids slept upstairs with us also. The spouses took complete care of their children. My code of conduct was extremely straightforward and well-defined. I was to work alongside the other women. I was supposed to dress as they did. I was supposed to behave and obey like they did. My first wife would tell me what to do. She was to ensure that I had the necessary supplies such as clothing, shoes, and work utensils. She would assign me daily job assignments. I was supposed to defer to her until told otherwise. I agreed. I moved my small suitcase upstairs. The first wife inspected it. The first thing she saw was the birth control tablets. She inquired as to what ailment I had that required me to take medicines on a daily basis. Of course, I told her about the tablets and what they were used for. She seized them and threw them out the window. "You must be like us," she said me. "No medications without Henry's approval. I understand that they are not permitted under any circumstances. The drugs are unnatural and violate God's will." I couldn't protest, but I assumed I wouldn't need them. I was handed a dress to wear. All underwear had to be white and made of pure cotton. So my undergarments were seized and ceremonially burned. There is something in their religion that requires them to wear specific types of underwear. The outer world could not taint their sacred place. The first wife searched my suitcase for other contraband. I misplaced my lipstick, deodorant, perfume, hankies, Tylenol, and of course my birth control pills. I could follow the rules or leave that night. Because you and I were not together, I didn't think losing the birth control pills would be such a big deal because I was entirely committed to you. I could start them when I got home. We enjoyed a basic but nutritious evening meal, and I helped clean up. That night, I slept soundly, thinking that my admission into this household would provide me the opportunity to investigate my subject. If I am successful, I will be the first to do this type of inside observation, preferably without male dominance intervention, while witnessing the inner workings of the family and their community. I eventually settled into a routine. The other spouses were initially dubious, but I gradually gained their trust. As a result, they became more open to my confidential one-on-one sessions. During these times, an abundance of information became available. The children shared generously as well. Unfortunately, I was not permitted to keep a diary. As a result, I had to memorize a large portion of what would have been written. Now, I hope you see why I required so much seclusion and secrecy after returning here. I sincerely regret having to do this to you, but that was the only method I could think of to put my memories into writing. She drank another sip of water and munched on some grapes. My thoughts were numerous. My observations were organized in my head. As she progressed, I took some notes for future queries. At the start of my second week, he convened a family session in which only he and his wife were permitted to attend. I was not permitted to attend. He stated that I had fit in quite well and that he would marry me as his fourth wife. Neither the spouses nor I had a say in the situation. He merely stated that God had given him a fourth wife. The first wife came upstairs and told me the news. I was utterly stunned. This couldn't be. This was impossible. I was already married. It made no difference to any of them. Henry had stated that God had given him a revelation for another wife, and since I was living under his roof, it seemed clear that I was to be his fourth wife. There is no disagreement with God or Henry. I would do what I was told. Naturally, I went downstairs right once and vehemently clashed with his assertions about the legality and morality of simply taking me without my consent. He became very hostile. I noticed the other wives pull back in terror. He painfully grabbed my arm and brought me into his bedroom. I looked for aid from the other women but received none. He waved them off. They simply turned and returned to their upper beds. They couldn't complain because this was their religion and lifestyle, let alone face Henry's bodily retaliation. I begged with him. He was insistent and more stronger than me. It was pointless to resist. He disrobed me and threatened harm if I yelled. I cowered in dread and begged him not to assault me. Then he assaulted me. He laid with me and promised that I would learn to love and respond to him. He informed me that his other wives had been directed to keep a tight eye on me, and that if I showed any signs of rebellion, he would punish me severely. If they did not report anything to him, they would face harsh punishment. He tolerated no disobedience. He pointed to the switches, rods, ropes, and paddles he kept in his chamber. Honey. She talked to me quietly now. He was quite worried about my fate. He dispatched me to my upstairs bed under the watchful eyes of his other wives. I cried alone for the remainder of the night. There was nobody to soothe me. The next morning at breakfast, he informed the children that I had become his fourth wife and should be treated with the same respect as his other wives. He said all of the children now had a fourth mother, and I had a happy family to live with. All of his children would now fall under my family's duties and responsibilities. I was now simply another one of his wives, his fourth wife. The other three spouses had children with him, and I was terrified that I might become pregnant as a result of his assaults that first night. I tried to come up with alternatives, but there were none. From then on, I was held captive. He spent each night with one of his wives. Every night. He threatened me before engaging in dominant sex. He instructed me to learn to be his subordinate, and I would come to enjoy having sex with him. This became a routine. I gradually learned to accept my status as his submissive sexual partner. I started to forget about my nice sex life with you. The dom and subsex roles became delightful, and I started looking forward to our time together. I absolutely miss it now. It is a very different feeling. I loved it. We'd never considered or done anything like this before, and it was really sexually pleasant. He was correct. I learned to appreciate sex like I had never done before. He didn't have to bind me down again. The other wives agreed that they, too, were sexually fulfilled. After a few weeks, he told me he could tell I was starting to love living with him. I had to agree, but didn't feel like the prisoner I was. I was constantly making mental notes on what I had learnt from him, the children, and the other women. I was allocated domestic responsibilities, while the other spouses had to work in the fields with him. My research seemed to be getting farther away. After the first month, we went as a family to see other families in the town. I was eventually allowed to leave his residence. He knew them all. He introduced me as his fourth wife. I was forced to go one step behind him and bow to the other families. Nobody could walk beside him or in front of him. Even the kids understood to keep well behind him. He was a true dominating. He worked hard to provide the basic requirements of life and expected us to work hard as well. Life was secure, if not free or equal. He learned that I held a teaching certificate. He praised God loudly. The neighborhood needs a licensed instructor to assist with the children's homeschooling. I was given the responsibility of creating lesson plans for various grades. All of my efforts required the consent of the local council, of which he was a member. Only men sat on the council. My outlines and lesson plans have to be consistent with their notions about family, religion, race, and the roles of men, women, and children in society. I learned about their staunch independence from all other political and law enforcement authorities. I learned about their economic structure through the community. Barter was the preferred method of exchange for the limited number of pigs, an ear of corn, and a sewing needle. Henry advised me that all husbands should treat their wives sexually in the same way that he treated his Dot. My experience in my designated function was ideal for my research. I gathered so much information that it seemed unbelievable to me. I was now welcomed into their house and community without prejudice. Previously, I was known as a subservient wife to a church and town leader. "Let me leave before I continue," she requested. I agreed since I, too, had to go. With that, she departed. She seemed completely absorbed in this event. I was in knots and fits inwardly as I listened in awe and fear. I was listening to a talking book about a fictional place. She didn't need to detail her sex with that guy. I believe she was rubbing it in that I was merely average. Why is she bragging now? I seem to be speaking with someone I don't know. She wasn't my wife, just another individual telling me a narrative. I was engrossed in her narration. She spoke in a monotone, showing no emotion. Obviously, her rehearsals had helped to reduce her emotional responses. She had distanced herself from her story. As she spoke, I felt more and more like a disinterested third party, listening to a wonderful story from a stranger with little connection to my reality as spouse. I attempted to detach so that my rage would not spill over. When she reappeared, she preferred to proceed without a question and answer time. She told me that I would get all of my questions answered today. I nodded as I took notes and tried to contain my emotions. I wondered if her inability to act like a wife to me over the last 5 months was related to her desire to detach her feelings from her recent painful history. She sat down again, this time holding a notebook. I've taken some notes over the last few weeks to help me with the next phase of this challenging topic. First and foremost, I want you to know that I have always and will continue to love you. You were aware that the way I loved you had altered. Rest convinced that I adore you. I'd want to tell you now why and how I left this household. I had grown close to his female daughter, Rebecca, on her 12th birthday. And I had made quite close friendships. The entire family planned a wonderful party for her. Her biological mother had a serious conversation with her the night before. Rebecca was particularly silent and aloof throughout the birthday party, which seemed out of place. She appeared to become more withdrawn as the celebration went on. Her friends were a year older than her. She appeared much more distraught after speaking with them alone as the party was winding down and the cake had been finished. The adults gathered their children, and they all exited in unison, as if following a predetermined nonverbal clue. We were left alone as a family once everyone had cleaned up. The other children were assigned to their own rooms. I knew he would spend the entire night in bed with his first wife, paying no attention to anything else. If I were to flee, that night was an excellent opportunity. I had more than enough knowledge to finish my investigation. At that point, I was resolved to escape. I removed the only thing I had left from when I had input my credit card, which I had carefully hidden under the insole of my outside shoes, which were carefully stored under my bed. I hadn't worn them since the day I started work. Shoes were supplied to me. I waited until the other wives appeared to be asleep. I grabbed my outerwear, put on my outdoor shoes, and crept out the door. I could hear Henry speaking to his first wife in calming tones. I carefully closed the door on my life and the research family. I left a note for Henry, explaining that I needed to depart to have my research published. That was the first he would learn about it. I thanked him for welcoming me into his family. I figured I might still need his help at some point. especially if I was caught fleeing. There was a good moon rising, so I had enough light to stroll along the road. I had walked with my mother once before, some 15 years ago. I hurried because I needed to get out of the county before morning, when my absence would be detected. I ran and walked, my head in turmoil. I'd enjoyed the lifestyle. Now I was focused on doing my research as fast as possible. I had to leave all emotions behind in order to accurately report my observations. After trekking over 8 kilometers, I was exhausted and ready to collapse. As a car went by, the sky began to light up. I was able to get a ride to the small town where the bus station located. The driver was not a sect member, therefore I would not be reported. I walked around to the back of the bus depot building by digging in the flower bed. Amazingly, I found the plastic sandwich bag holding the money I had stowed away months before. You know the rest, Ethan. Let me remind you that there was no power in the house where I resided. No telephone, radio, or television, and no electronic games for the kids to play with. The landscape was essentially rural, and the culture was reminiscent of the early 18th century. I returned home and began recording my experiences on the computer. Initially, my writings were disorganized. I just started writing as ideas and memories came to me. Later, I was able to assign dates and order them into my thesis. Thank heavens for word processors, or I'd still be doing it this time next year. I believed this required my complete dedication and seclusion from mind-altering emotional events, such as sex with you. Now, my darling spouse, comes the even more difficult phase. Shall I proceed? Or do you have any queries regarding what I've previously told you? I chose for more listening. I had a feeling my marriage was already over and irretrievable, so I might as well listen to her. She continued, I've had time to reflect on the 2 lifestyles I've had. They are considerably distinct, with very different societal conventions and expectations. To be honest, each has both disadvantages and advantages. Honestly, I am drawn to rural communal living. The topic of numerous spouses has some extremely positive features. This is discussed in my soon-to-be-published thesis. I am also creating a novel about my experiences. I've already received a $50,000 deposit as a result of giving the publisher with an overview. Chapter headers for the first chapter. As you can see, I've been really busy these last few months. I jotted down to ask her where the money was. Ethan, she continued, the wives got along really well. There appeared to be no genuine resentment toward their common husband. Actually, there was some rivalry to see who could best satisfy his needs. After several months of reflection, the issue that drove my mother and me to go seemed to be less significant than I had previously believed. When my thoughts was driven by my emotions, I believed that everyone must fit into their culture in order to be happy. I was initially turned off by this, but I can now tolerate it. Despite the fact that I am aware that the outside society in which you and I used to live is diametrically opposed. Every culture has its own set of rules to follow. Some cultures were not even close. Remember I interrupted? Do you mean that attack no longer turns you off? That's not only sick, it's evil. She continued as if I hadn't said anything. I guess she didn't want to get off her script. Allow me to handle the matter of not having marital relations with you. I know this is a major point of dispute for you. I am deeply saddened. I wanted to tell you why, but I was afraid you'd lose control. If you did that, I would have lost several weeks of investigation due to the inevitable personality clash. Clearly, Henry has not enjoyed sex with me since I left. I wanted to remember all of my sexual interactions with him, so having sex with you would most certainly cause me to forget the details of our intimate moments, which I thoroughly enjoyed in order to keep my memory clear. I had to decline sex with you when you initially returned. The nausea from the pregnancy made me less interested in sex. As time passed, I realized that I was actually married to 2 very different cultures, represented by 2 very different men who loved me in very different ways. I could not continue in this manner in the outer society in which you reside. I, am wedded to you. We create soft, gentle, and cozy love. I really enjoyed those times and have no regrets. You are the ideal husband for this culture. In the town where I resided as the 4th wife, I was the submissive and he was the dominant. I grew to enjoy that style of lovemaking as well. In fact, it is vastly superior. I knew you could never treat me like that. You're too gentle for that. Believe me, going without sex for several months has not been easy for me. I've craved it. But I crave wild sex with Henry. I need to address this dilemma as soon as possible. My thesis is finished, and the pressure is relieved. I need to make an important decision about my marriage. Who am I getting married to? More importantly, which of these various societies and cultures do I prefer to live in? Obviously, I can't live in both and be married to both you and Henry. He wouldn't let me give myself to you. If I decide to return to him, I can't have had sex with anyone else when I return. That would be unfaithfulness to him. I am pregnant by him. I am not sure if you can accept this child as one of your own. If I choose to live outside alongside you, you have some reason to believe that I was untrue to you. Remember, it all started with an assault. I believe this child is a result of that assault. You notice I'm wearing your wedding band. I reclaimed it from Henry when he took me as his fourth wife. He said I needed to wear a wedding band, but he didn't need to buy one because he already had my ring. It was only much later that I willingly and eagerly participated in dom and subsexual activity with Henry. After the first few weeks, having sex with him was exciting and completely new to me. I loved it. I voluntarily told him I loved him and enjoyed having sex with him. I told him I had returned home to see if my mother had made a mistake by leaving. I'm now convinced she was wrong. I tried to express my affection for that life culture by dressing in their clothing, the tranquility of the ancient lifestyle, the closeness to Mother Nature, the reliance on one another, and the dominant protective male demonstrated how life could be lived happily. I was disappointed that the other wives had not had the opportunity to experience the outside world and choose their own culture, as I had. They couldn't freely adopt the communal lifestyle because they didn't have the same exposure to outside cultures as I did. I've had both positive and negative experiences. Our society suffers from superficiality. This outside society is more concerned with acquiring things than with developing relationships. Now that my degree is secure, I can consider my future rationally. The challenge of teaching in that small town is something I thoroughly enjoy. I have the opportunity to be Henry's loving and caring fourth wife, and I am seriously considering it. My choice is between you and the outside society, or him and his society and culture. This is not a simple decision. I enjoy academic life and will miss that win. Or if I return true now that I've sneaked out, he might not accept me back. That is a risk I must take. I've been able to communicate with him through friends in the surrounding community. He is willing to forgive and accept me back, but I must do penance. He also demands that I bring in cash equal to what I would have contributed to the family while I am not present. He will not accept me back under any circumstances unless I return immediately after receiving my PhD. The other option is to continue my life with you in this society. I will need time to make that decision, but I must do so soon or risk losing the opportunity to marry Henry for the fourth time. I ask you to give me that time. Susan narrowed her eyes as she said, I have told my thesis committee every detail. I left out nothing to them. I even told them how I'd learned to enjoy the dom and sub relationship. They know I am pregnant. It means nothing to them academically, and what they think of me personally is trivia to me. The PhD is what I was going for, and now I am going to get it. Now I am willing to answer any and all of your questions. I just hope you will be civil to me as I have been to you all day long. I sat quietly for a moment and deep contemplation. My mind came into order rather rapidly. I realized that I had no need of the information taken, neither from her computer nor from the grand accounting file. The tape recorder needed to be hanged, so I did it. The tapes would be better than anything I could get anywhere else. I was unsure if I was more stoic or angry. What I had was a deep anger and a need for separation from this whole situation. I took a deep breath, looked straight into her staring eyes, and spoke, working hard to control my temper. You have forgotten several things in your decision-making for your future. You know about the statistical decision tree. You have used it before, just as we have used it together. Opportunities provide the necessity for decisions, or decisions have consequences, both positive and negative. These consequences do not have equal probabilities of occurring. You know all this. Why didn't you employ this statistical instrument in your decision-making? You have been acting foolishly. Your mind is confused by your emotions, and you don't even see it. You have left out your most crucial consequence. You have not considered me. You have kept me out of your life so long that me and my sentiments and emotions are no longer variables in your decision-making. You have both forgotten and willingly destroyed your wedding vows to me, to your family, and to God. Do I not remember clearly your promising to have and to hold me in me only for better or for worse, forsaking all others until death do us part? Yet you have taken another lover, a husband, and bear his child. What more clear could you have done to destroy me and our once great marriage? You've pushed me out of your life. Your option to stay my wife is no longer valid. I've determined that our marriage no longer exists. These months of isolation and secrecy, combined with the revelation of absolute adultery to me, have devastated the United States. No, my beloved wife. Your decision to remain married to me is equally yours and mine. I'll make my decision immediately. Our marriage is no longer an option for you. You eliminated your own possibility. You don't have a future with me. Tomorrow I'll meet with a divorce lawyer. Your choices are restricted to bad or worse. One option is to try to reconnect with Henry, your actual man. Your second husband in that horrible, evil town may accept you back. Of course, your third alternative is still available. You may follow your mother's example and raise your child without a father. Of course, there's the fourth and final alternative. You could kill yourself and your scum-sucking child. That's a really poor one. Maybe someday, if you decide not to return to your actual man, you can find another sucker like me to be a parasite on your child, who is not mine. And I will not support it. I will not assist you in fulfilling any of your options. You're on your own there. You can still make a solid living while supporting yourself and the consequences of your infidelity. You don't need or want my emotional or financial support any longer. You haven't needed me in months. You have been torturing me for 5 months. If you prefer to remain outside, as you stated, you will do it without my help or companionship. My past, present, and future with you have all died. To be clear, our relationship is over. You murdered it. We have no future. Knowing what I know now, I would never remarry you after our divorce. You choose your research above your husband. You chose infidelity over faithfulness. You chose lies above the truth. You appear to have chosen adultery with Henry over your marital vows. You've wrecked me, my manhood, my marriage, and a portion of my finances. You never offered me an opportunity to compete, and I wouldn't have accepted it if you had. When we put on our wedding bands, neither of us was available to anyone else. Neither would have to compete for the other's affection, support, or sexual closeness. You've taken advantage of my salary to maintain yourself as you engage in crazy sexual behavior, give your heart to someone, and become pregnant as a result. So the man you've chosen asks me to pay him a dowry to get you off my hands. I chuckled a hard, angry laugh, wondering how the hell I was going to accomplish it. I have my own grant money. I have enough on hand to go back into it. If I return by July, I can still file for the remainder of my grant money. I have also made a down payment on my novel. That will certainly be sufficient, was her indignant response. You do not need to dive into your valuable bank account to fund me. I am totally capable of caring for myself. Susan, you've used me. You have truly exploited me, not loved me. My hard work has sponsored your adultery through research. Your grant paid both tuition and academic costs. Everything else was paid for using my money, which I freely disclosed to you. You have engaged in both sexual and financial infidelity. Now I'm wondering if you didn't just marry me so you could have your own life and finish your degree more easily. I have only served as a stepping stone in your journey to achieve your own objectives. I clearly see what you've done. You broke my heart, and it appears you could care less about doing so. You even lied when you told me love me only a little bit ago. That must be the mother of all falsehoods, and it came from the lips of the only woman I ever loved. Susan, I have lost all desire to be near you. She winced, shaking her head. Ethan, I've had nothing but affection for you all these years. I hoped you'd accept me. I am torn inside too. My heart is divided. I wanted you to show me how much you love me by remaining devoted to me throughout the previous few months, despite all of your grumbling and bitching. You lost out by allowing your emotions to spin out of control, destroying our marriage. I flung something back at her. Your heart is divided, but mine is broken. You broke it, and you can't repair it. You promised me not to let another man into it. I don't think you understand what love and fidelity are. So you wanted me to express my love for you by tolerating your adultery? I yelled at her. You wanted me to love you so deeply that your decision to leave me would hurt even more. What type of monster have you become? He's a monster. You've become like him. You deserve each other. Are you certain you're actually in love with a dominant monster? Male? I was outraged again. She had revealed all of this to a group of her intellectual friends, but she had refused to tell me. I realized I was, and had probably always been, a sideline in her life. Susan. My rage and pain were obvious. Will you go back to him? Do you know what your penance will be? Of course not. He's not going to tell you. He will flog you half to death in order to teach you a lesson and to show his other wives that they must follow his lead or face the same horrific repercussions. You have escaped once. That will not happen again. If you go back, you will die there sooner or later, most likely sooner. If he murders you, you will be buried in a pigsty and your death will be ruled as natural. I bet his beating you to death is considered a man's right and duty to an erring wife under his religion. I can tell you that your agony will not be easy or brief. Most likely you will be flogged in front of all the town's wives before being taken home and thrashed even more. Any man who demands a dowry after assaulting you will undoubtedly take joy in teaching everyone a nasty lesson about power and obedience. They don't believe in outside doctors, so don't expect to have your shattered bones repaired. You are very likely to lose your pregnancy as a result of the beatings. You'd better figure out what your penance is before jeopardizing your own or your unborn child's safety. That is not acceptable to me. Or of you. Of course, I had no way of knowing if what I stated was true or not. I only wanted to demean and scare her. I was not considering any form of love rehabilitation or marriage resolution. I was furious at being seized. As you so succinctly informed me, I can care for myself. You'll find out if you go back. You told me he was a physically strong individual who could and would dominate you with the community's approval. If you value your life and that of his child, you must proceed with extreme caution. You will feel no regret about murdering yourself or his unborn child growing in your belly. I had heard stories about women escaping their culture's darkness and cruelty. That's something I could understand. But how could an intellectual person like Susan, who was aware of freedom, equality, and opportunity, choose to return? Surely she was mentally ill. I couldn't think of any other reason for her to contemplate returning. Was a monstrous, dominant male so appealing that she would abandon her marital vows, her husband, her family, and her freedom? How could this wickedness possess her? I got up and strolled around the now darkened room. The sun is set on both Earth and my marriage. Susan, I mumbled this morning. I was merely angry with you. Tonight I'm tired of you and washed out. I am a defeated individual. I'm feeling numb within. I still feel angry, but sorrow, despair, and personal defeat as a man and a husband have overcome me. I am isolated. Nonetheless, I feel a sense of relief from the torment you've kept me in. At the very least, I now have closure on this chapter of my life. Now all I have to do is figure out what I'm going to do tonight and tomorrow. My sole concern right now is how I'll get through life without you. You no longer exist for me. You and your anxieties are no longer part of me. This latter, I whispered gently in despair. The emotional exhaustion took control, and I felt 100 years old. I'd been royally screwed and rejected by the person I had loved so much. Somehow, I didn't care like I did this morning. My heart was broken and wouldn't mend. I didn't feel like attacking her. All I wanted was to get this over with. I wanted her out of my life completely. I wanted to forget everything about her, including how I had ever known her. It would be preferable not to recall anything about her. She simply sat there. She said nothing. When I left, she remained in the same position, staring at the wall behind me. I walked out to work out, rapid walking while leisurely thinking. I had unfinished business. She had made her own penalty. But there was one man who had yet to face the fury of a capable and determined outsider whom he had wronged. My intelligence, experience, and global relationships were to be tested against a strong-willed, massively muscled, ignorant giant who lived in seclusion from modern technology. I will not take hostages if we both die. So be it. But he would definitely go first. There would be justice served. This is what I dedicated myself to. I slept on the sofa. Early the next morning, I phoned in for 2 weeks. Personal family leave. Susan had gotten up and made coffee. Susan, I said, enjoy the coffee. You won't get any after you return. There will be 1,000 other things you will not enjoy, but you will have complete dominance over the sex. Of course, you can raise your child in isolation from the outside world. Enjoy your life, Susan. You can take care of yourself, I am sure. Ha ha. We will shortly get divorced. You can keep the 50,000 deposit. But remember, once you're back with your real man, your research and publication days are finished. Dot. This house is going to be mine and mine alone. Your name may be on the title beside mine, but I have completed all payments. No judge will give you an interest in it as long as you keep the $50,000. I won't let you have your genuine man in any part of this house either. That won't happen till I die. It hits the market today. I had plans for her true man that I was not telling her or anybody else about. You should start planning your relocation. I'm relocating my belongings to the corporate apartment this afternoon. I will acquire the rest soon. This house should be easy to sell. I'll be legally free from you, just as I'm now emotionally free. I quote L, send you the name of my divorce lawyer in case you need to contact me. From this point on, we spoke with lawyers, not directly to each other. Here's your cell phone. I packed in silence without sharing coffee or saying anything else. I kept the tapes in case we were divorced. I wasn't going to say goodbye because I didn't see anything positive about the scenario. She had become a non-entity to me, merely a piece of furniture that would have to be relocated when the house was sold. The gloom of the previous 5 months was giving way to the light of a new day for me. I went to the bank, a realtor, a divorce lawyer, and finally to my parents' house. I was going to collect something only I knew was stored in the attic. I had business to handle, connections to make plans with, justice to dispense, and a new life to create for myself. I drove to business headquarters and rented the apartment for 2 months. I was finally free. I despised it, but freedom comes at a terrible price. Crossing me the way Henry did was going to be costly for him as well. The following day was full with fresh activities. I terminated my bank and savings accounts and transferred everything to new accounts at another bank in the city. Our credit card was canceled. I've applied for a new one. I discovered a divorce lawyer in the city and made an appointment to visit him the next day. My supervisor was aware of my marital issues and offered whatever corporate aid I could require. I told him all I wanted was for him to transfer my paycheck to my new account and give me a few weeks off. If Susan summoned the secretaries, they should give Susan my new phone number at the flat, and I would handle her calls that took up an entire day. The next day, I drove back to my former house. Susan wasn't at home. I took the tape recorder from the stack of tapes that still lay on the table. I retrieved the remainder of my books, files, clothes, tools, photographs, personal belongings, and cello. I called the realtor and gave them my new address and phone number. They informed me that they could not list my house for sale without Susan's signature. Well, she could live there. Allow her to pay the mortgage, trim the lawn, and repair the bathroom toilet, which tended to quit working and run over at the most inconvenient times. I informed Susan of my whereabouts and provided her with my new temporary phone number. She had my cell phone number if she needed to reach me. I assumed she wouldn't want to talk to me. I told her I wanted to talk with her. I was not interested in discussing our impending divorce. I wanted to talk to her about Henry's daily activities. The more information one has about the enemy, the more likely it is that an effective strategy will be established. I was now a man on a mission to ensure that Henry get what he deserved for his role in breaking up my marriage. My focus on delivering justice appeared to provide me with the energy I required. The note was a passionate request for us to meet. I definitely needed her aid, comprehending Henry's mentality and everyday activities to the smallest detail. While doing so, I had to treat her as if she were part of the enemy camp. She was supposed to be the unwitting spy who revealed everything I needed to know. The following stop was back in the city to see the divorce attorney. I told the lawyer what had transpired, armed with her computer's tapes and disks. I informed him I would not participate in any pre-divorce therapy. I was willing to talk to her, but not with a counselor. I wanted to split the estate 50-50ths, including Susan's deposit money and half the future income from whatever publishing she accomplished as a result of her work with her research community. I would not consent to alimony or child support. I requested that she give up her marital name, Alan, and that the child not be named either Ethan or Alan. She refused to sully my name. I wrote out a large check from my new bank account. I didn't really care. I knew independence would be expensive, but independence is what I desired. Freedom from Susan, freedom from marriage and from hatred. All I needed was a clear head. So my entire attempt to achieve justice for Henry would be a complete triumph. Time was not an urgent matter for me. Success was crucial. That night, Susan called me. She too wanted to chat. We agreed to meet for lunch at a diner in our former hometown the next day. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. I had focus, inner strength, commitment, and a strategy. Susan was entirely focused in history. I packed plenty for several days because I planned to see my parents and her mother after visiting Susan. Susan and I met the following day at the diner. She wore a trendy pregnant dress. She wore minimal makeup. She shone as pregnant ladies do. She looked quite good. I wish things had gone differently, and the child had been mine. She looked a lot better than she had in the preceding 5 months. Her cheek was still seriously wounded. The waitress sat us at a table in the corner. The cafe was not full at lunchtime, so we had time before my scheduled journey east to her mother's house and then to my parents' home in Colorado. I was quite cautious in my approach to Susan. I congratulated her for returning to the 21st century. I wasn't very interested in why she had done so. We were done as a pair. "Ethan," she started after we had been seated and ordered. "I'd like to apologize for how I expressed things the other day, Susan. I responded in the same polite manner that you described. Our upcoming divorce is the result of what you did, rather than how you reported it. I am sure you understand that I cannot live with what you have done. You will receive the divorce petition within the next few days. I trust you will accept the terms. The divorce will grant you the legal right to return to Henry or live as a single mother. The divorce will also release me from all legal duties to you and Henry's child. You'll have. I can never absolve or forgive you for the infidelity you engaged in. What I want you to know is that I am working hard not to despise you. There were mitigating factors. You were a prisoner, yet you did not attempt to break free or attack him physically. Perhaps it was best not to fight him. But his first sex with you was not exactly like an assault by a stranger who then fled after killing you. What you told me has left my heart and mind confused. I ask for your forgiveness for the horrible words I shouted before she could speak. I came here to ask you to help me understand the life you led while there. I do not want to hear about sex. I'd like to know what time you got up and when you went to bed. Where was the house you resided in? What kind of employment does Henry undertake and where? I'd like to know the name of the community and its location. I'm not interested in any of your intimate relationships with Henry or his other 3 wives. The waitress served us, and we ate quietly until Susan finished. She took a glass of water, glanced at me, and said, "Ethan, I intend to return to Henry within the next few days and see what my situation is there. You terrified me into thinking Henry would physically and emotionally abuse me. I don't think he will, but I need to talk to him about the terms of my return if I decide to do so. I also need to know if our marriage, that is, you and I, is truly beyond repair. My heart remains torn between you and Henry. She knows how to push my rage button. Susan, I told you that our marriage is gone. Your heart was divided. Mine was crushed. The fact that you are considering another man is enough to end our relationship forever. Perhaps one day you will understand how badly you have harmed me. Infidelity is more than just sexual. Perhaps one day you will face the abyss of adultery in its purest form. I wouldn't want that on anyone. Even you. Your ignorance is bliss. I held exclusive rights to you. You discard that in your pursuit of an academic degree and some crazy sex. I suppose you forgot that you promised me your loyalty in front of your mother, my family, friends, and God. You may be certain that I, Ethan Allen, am no longer a part of your future. I will do everything I can to ensure that. This is not what I'd like to talk about. I intended to spend this time with you learning about your activities, how you lived, where you lived, who you shared outside chores with, and other details. Our connection will not be part of this moment. We will share now or ever again. Any talk about you and me as a couple must go through my lawyer, Ethan. She tightened her lips. You do not have to be hateful. There is enough hatred in the outside world to go around several times. Let's get to it. You're telling me about the topics I inquired about. Please, She informed me when they got up and went to bed, who in the family did what, and when. I inquired about Henry, the wives, and the children's daily schedules. She actually told me everything I wanted to know. I believe I did not raise any suspicions about my plans for Henry. I certainly didn't want Henry to develop paranoia. That was obviously foolish of me to think. He was far too selfish, arrogant, and controlling to consider that any chick, an outsider, may pursue him. My life's objective at this moment was precisely that. I discovered that Henry was deeply religious. He read his holy writings every day, but he was also superstitious. He believed in angels, visions, and visits from celestial entities. He was a proud man. He had intercourse regularly, generally multiple times per day. Sometimes he would have 2 or 3 wives in one evening. Susan stated she enjoyed trying to keep up with him. I believe she said that to provoke me and humiliate me. She succeeded, but I made no comment. Henry was the town's leader, and the other men admired him for his violent sexual behavior and dominance over his family and wives. He despised men who were not dominating in their own homes, yet he tolerated no intrusion into his own life or family. He seemed like a control freak to me. I wondered how he felt about me. I disregarded that concept because it didn't matter what he thought. For me, he was merely a pile of horse poo. So why should I care what he thinks? I predicted that Henry, the high and mighty, would suffer a humiliating defeat. I recalled a scripture verse from my childhood. Pride precedes a fall. Henry was undeniably proud, and I was looking forward to seeing his balloon burst. I said goodbye to Susan and wished her luck with her conversations with Henry. I did not extend my hand in parting. I had a 6-hour drive ahead of me and would need to stay overnight somewhere. My first trip was Susan's mother's place, which was about an hour distant. She had returned home from her school teaching job. She and I were on nice terms, but not particularly close. She invited me in, seemed shocked to see me, but also appeared thrilled. I had her sit at her kitchen table with some fruit and drink to munch on. I told her Susan was pregnant. She smiled and congratulated us on starting our family. The tragic news came out as I recounted Susan's activities during the previous 6 months. Susan had told her mom nothing. She knew Susan had gone on a research project but had no idea where or what it was about. She was horrified and cried after learning about Susan's decisions. She was outraged that Susan would ever consider visiting her village, let alone be charmed with its culture. Susan's mother compared her flight to the Jews who escaped Auschwitz at a high emotional cost. She and Susan had fled previously. Susan was no longer merely playing with fire. She had been seriously burned and was going back for more. Her mother was enraged, disgusted, terrified, and devastated to see her only child make such a mockery of herself and her marriage. I'd never seen someone in such distress before. My own suffering had met a soulmate. We hugged for a long time, each of us grieving the loss of a loved one, the same loved one. I cried, and we cried together. We shared our loss and gained strength from each other. I felt like her mother was taking Susan's emotional place in me. I was temporarily relieved. The sun was fading. The dark shadows of night wrapped their arms about us. We stood there embracing for what felt like an hour. She cried. What? My shirt and mine dampened her hair. Finally, our emotions were spent. We broke up. I was welcome to stay the night and continue my journey the next day. I was emotionally tired and gratefully accepted the wonderful offer. After breakfast and some decent coffee, I was back on the road for the 5-hour drive to my parents. I vowed to stay in contact with Susan's mother. She was truly a gorgeous lady, both physically and emotionally. Until Henry, I had noticed how much Susan resembled or had been like her mother. My hatred for him grew. I contacted my parents on my cell phone while driving across the Colorado-Utah border. Nobody responded at home. I called Dad's cell phone and he answered. He and my mother were visiting my brother, so I decided to prolong my trip to see him and his wife. The reunion would help me find some security in my new life without Susan. I stopped at a motel before driving the final mile to my brother and his wife's apartment. My brother recently returned from Afghanistan, where he served as a company commander in an infantry battalion. After the typical embraces, handshakes, slaps on the back, and kisses on the cheek from Mom, I invited them to spend some family time with me in the front room since they were getting along well during the day. I recommended that we have pizza delivered, along with salads and soft drinks. The order was placed, and we assembled his family. My other brother and his wife were the only ones absent. I informed them that I had awful news about my marriage. Susan and I were divorcing. Mother cried. Dad inquired whether there was any hope of reconciliation. The entire story had to come out. So I began with Susan's study project and my job-related vacation. We were interrupted since the pizza meal was brought during dinner. I went on to describe Susan's changes, how she worked on her thesis and her upcoming graduation. Then I explained her pregnancy and how it came about, as well as how she felt about her connection with me and our future. As rage and pain clashed within me, the ache welled up once more. Mom sobbed harder and clutched to Dad. Dad was also emotional, but he hid it. His hands trembled and his eyes wet. My brother went silent. He sat rigidly, his movements tensed. I could see his military academy and fighting experience attitude taking hold. He got up and went about in deep concentration. Finally, I completed my story. I had not left anything out. My brother merely asked a statement-based question. He addressed Ethan in a quiet but authoritative tone. You and I need some time together. Let's just you and me go for a walk. With that, he took my hand and drew me from the couch, and we excused ourselves. It was early evening, so we drove to my motel. We called the family to let them know where we were and that we'd be back in about an hour. Ethan, you're in a war, and probably unprepared. I'd like to inform you how to handle this conflict. My brother assumed charge of the discourse. There are rules of war to obey. If you expect to win. Susan, I understand you are going to lose, but you don't have to lose the war. Henry is your enemy, and he must be destroyed without causing you pain. Heavy casualties. I have no idea what you have planned, and I honestly don't want to know right now, after the war is won. You can tell me. He is continuing his lecture on wartime conduct. The first step is to get to know your opponent. Understand his strengths and weaknesses. Assess your own strengths and weaknesses. It is critical that you match your strengths with his weaknesses. Do not allow him to use his strengths or exploit your weaknesses. Next, you decide when and where to fight. Remember that surprise is very important. Limit collateral damage by executing a surgical strike. You do not want to injure innocent people. Plan carefully. Keep your plans secret. Cover the steps you took to prepare. Do not let emotions control your actions. What and how you do it must be completed in the shortest amount of time possible. Do not engage in a protracted battle. Think carefully. Carefully planned. Have more than enough resources to be successful. He smiled. I know you've already got some ideas. Don't rely on someone else or the civil authorities to do your job. Best of luck and be very cautious. Now keep this conversation private between us. It's just you and me. Do not tell Mom or Dad anything. You are already in the fight. Remember these guidelines. Let's get out of here and go back to my place. The next morning, we had breakfast together. Then Mom and Dad left for home. I followed them because I had something hidden in their attic that they didn't know about. I wanted to retrieve it for later use. I spent several days at home, sleeping in my old bedroom in bed from high school. Mom was recovering. Dad and I had several lengthy discussions about my future. Nothing was mentioned about my plans for justice. We only had a few days as a family. Then it was time to move on with my life. Mom and Dad went to Walmart to get some supplies, and I went to the attic, found what I needed, and loaded it into my large SUV. The next day, I was back on the road, this time heading home. Not home, but back at my apartment. My boss had been urging me to join another expedition, and I had agreed. Susan's role as sheriff eased the acceptance and planning of the trip. I informed my parents of my impending 2-month trip back to the equatorial Atlantic off Africa. My trip was not scheduled until all of my unused accumulated leave time had been used up. I had up to 3 months until I had to return to Utah. I put the gun in the boxes for short-term storage. I knew there were satellites watching all of us, so I picked up some furniture from my former residence to put into storage, along with the boxes with the gun in it. I gained access to satellite topographical maps of the town and surrounding areas where Henry lived. These I studied intently. I wanted him. I wanted to kill him. But first he needed a lesson in humility. I also wanted not to go to jail or hang. The more I thought of it, I thought that killing him was too good. He would suddenly just disappear. His light would go out and he would not suffer. I thought of putting the bullet on his Johnny. I knew I could do that, even at a mile, but the one shot could kill him just a couple of inches. And it would. And he might bleed to death. Bleeding to death would be a better death for him than just blowing his head off. He would suffer some before dying. But I didn't want to kill him yet. Justice had to be applied so that his family and friends knew he had been humiliated and degraded. That was better than any death, especially by a headshot. Still, he might not fully realize that the shot was from an adversary. I wanted him to know that Susan's husband had done him in. Still, there had to be no way it could ever be proved. I smiled. I had Henry on my mind and soon in my sights. I was not going to let Susan off without some justice either. This meant contacting a plaintiff's lawyer. I wanted the meanest son of a witch possible. There were plenty available. My boss recommended one to me. I told him I wanted him to threaten the university with a huge lawsuit for agreeing with Susan's research and the way she did it. I was angry that they had condoned her immoral behavior. I didn't know the law and didn't really care. What I wanted to do was get the attention of the board of trustees and president. I figured bad publicity and lots of it would be just what they didn't want. He was a typical lawyer. For a fee, he would do almost anything. Anyone can file suit against anybody for any reason in this free country of ours. I had enough money to buy his attention. His first letter to the president of the university, with copies to every member of the board of trustees, got immediate attention. A $20 million lawsuit was something to be avoided. The return letter from the president indicated that Susan's degree was not yet granted. The board of trustees, and he had not given final approval. I instructed my lawyer to notify the president that the only way to avoid a lawsuit and the ensuing publicity was to have Susan's research rejected in totality. The decision to revoke her thesis and its research basis had to be final. That meant it could not be subject to review. I had to be totally satisfied. There would be no compromise on my part. It was less than 2 weeks that my lawyer received a copy of a Board of Trustees resolution that had passed unanimously. The resolution directed the president to correct the findings of the Department of Social Sciences, reprimand the people involved in approving her research, and deny approval of her degree. There was an additional stipulation, something in legal terms, about with prejudice. My lawyer said that term was unnecessary, but meant that she could not use any her research again for academic purposes. The board went further than our demands. They wrote the publisher that had given her an advance, indicating that the university's name could not be attached or used in any fashion related to the book. They went further than that by freezing Susan's research grant account so that further withdrawals would be denied. I was satisfied. Several weeks later, I learned that they had not been able to contact Susan to tell her of their decision. They had contacted my lawyer to see if he could provide the president with contact information. He called me. I gave him Susan's divorce lawyer's name and address, her mother's address and Henry's address. Susan was not at our former residence. I wondered where she was. Not that I cared, but I guess I did care because I was thinking about where she might be and if she were physically safe. I detested what she had done, but had concern for her physical safety and the protection of her unborn kid. Even if it weren't mine. It was not the child's fault. There was another component of my strategy which I thought long and hard about before adopting. I was going to leave a message from God to Henry. This was to take the shape of a formal document. I adopted the format of the Declaration of Independence with a number of, whereas words I would quote scripture to terrify him. This component of my endeavor requires some attention on my organization. Little by little, I organized it, proofread it, and modified it multiple times. This done, I acquired some extremely costly linen paper and printed it out using my computer and inkjet printer. The end product looked very formal. I put the pages in a gorgeous and pricey container with each sheet carefully inserted in plastic liners, then bound into a converted wedding picture album. I thoroughly eliminated all fingerprints. I felt sure that with Henry's superstitious temperament and his belief in new revelations and visitations from heavenly creatures, that this document would terrify him so much that he would accept his punishment as the will of God. I grinned and felt good about my deceit. I was balancing my strengths against his shortcomings. My brother's good counsel was being followed. I am currently focusing more on my scheduled excursions. One option was to pay Henry a visit. That journey was to continue to Africa without returning to the city following Henry's meeting with the avenging angel. I had the distinction of being the vengeful angel. I would emerge out of nowhere and vanish without a trace. I loved my plan, but I realized that any mistake may spell disaster for me. For success, I needed to learn and practice. Everything had to be done in complete solitude. Having internet access made confidential information gathering far easier than going to a library where my activities could be traced. I studied the maps and knew just where Henry's farmland was. I knew what crops he planted, and when he tilled the soil, planted, visited, and harvested, the satellite photographs available to oil exploration corporations were 100 times superior than those available to the common public. As a geologist, I was familiar with geography and how to analyze satellite data precisely. Infrared photos and precise landscape heights to within inches helped to enhance the visual spectrum. I could even determine the depth of tractor tire imprints in the fields. I could see Henry and knew where he preferred to relax away from the sun. There was a lone tree at the edge of his wheat field, and its roots appeared to have found a permanent water source deep in a fracture in the surface. There was a small ridge nearby, only 8 feet high but ideal for sheltering behind. There was an access road on the opposite side of the little rocky ridge. The dirt road led to a paved county road a few miles away. The setup was amazing. I was choosing the battlefield. It was to my liking. All of this required several weeks of intensive preparation and research. In addition to topography, my studies included human anatomy and specific surgical techniques. I spent several hours studying anatomy. Certain features of human physiology and surgical procedures. I discovered that if both testicles were removed, most men would lose their sexual desire. If only one testicle is removed, the remaining testicle would still produce enough testosterone to keep the man's hostility and sexual urge active. I wanted Henry to preserve his desire for sexual fulfillment, but I wanted to take away his ability to meet those demands. As a result, he would experience sexual frustration. He would maintain his strong sexual energy but be unable to satisfy his sexual need. I smiled to myself. Henry robbed my wife, who had sexually delighted me. Now I was about to steal his method of sexual delight. Tit for tat, eye for an eye. I enjoyed my strategy, but risk was a continuous reminder to me. I didn't want to go to prison if I was captured. That was a distinct possibility. The threat made my planning more precise. I visited many stores and purchased what appeared to be a warehouse of supplies. Actually, I had only acquired a few products and supplies. I had ordered some makeup from a theatrical supply store online. This includes a full-length gray beard and some unusual shoes, 3 sizes too large, obtained from a thrift shop. My lawyer called one morning and disturbed my plans. Susan had signed the divorce papers and was not contesting them. I didn't even need to appear in court. The documents were filed when the statutory 60-day period began. My lawyer informed her lawyer of the university's decision, but he already knew and had informed Susan. Apparently, she had misplaced it. When she heard that news, she completely broke down. She'd lost her valuable degree. Her studies had been discarded, and she was a single pregnant lady expecting a kid out of wedlock. I spoke with her mother, who informed me Susan had been devastated. She inquired whether I had played any role in the university's decision-making. I assured her that I surely did. She should inform Susan that I made that unfavorable decision as payback for her cheating and 5 months of sexless marriage. I told her mother how much I regretted hurting her by hurting Susan. There is always collateral damage, and I deeply hated Susan's mother being struck by the fallout debris from that blast. Nonetheless, Susan was the one who set off the chain reaction of evil. Our home was on the market and sold quickly. We shared the equity money equally, as agreed in the divorce papers. Susan did not want to live there. I didn't care where she would live. She might be able to live with her mother. I could choose where to hang out later. The oddest aspect of all this was that I had lost my desire for sex. My energies was completely devoured by my project. I assumed this was how Susan felt while working on her thesis. I hoped my cravings would return, but I wasn't too anxious. Susan had been my only woman. I've never desired anyone else and still don't. I didn't want her anymore either. Throughout this time, I made regular visits to the workplace and even discussed pre-trip plans with my employer. Our survey of the Eastern Atlantic's potential oil fields was not yet completed. My knowledge was required again in Africa in the near future. I understood that if perfectly handled, this would be my perfect alibi, if I needed one. At this point, I had to gain my geek friend's trust. That concerned me, but I needed to do it. I told him about my idea. He nearly laughed himself silly. Then they said, "Let's get started." He secured blank, authentic U.S. passports using up-to-date images of each of us, as well as links through his former FBI contacts and the black market. He also received authentic-looking certifications and blank IDs. He created false driver's licenses and passports for us using his name, my image, and my signature. He created a passport with my image and his name, so we each had 2 passports. One was legitimate, but the other had the pictures and signatures inverted. We now possessed false passports and driver's licenses in addition to our legitimate ones. While this was going on, I gathered all of the supplies I could ever need. I bought these for cash, solely from pet supply stores, hobby shops, theatrical and outdoor supply stores, and medical suppliers on the internet. I had to use a credit card for internet transactions, so I limited them to a minimum and avoided patterns of purchasing. The most difficult task was obtaining ammunition for the pistol I had brought in from Africa. I went into the woods of central Utah for target practice with a gun I'd never shot before. I immediately became highly accurate. Old skills can be relearned in a short period of time. It was like riding a bike. All you need is practice. My plans were coming together. I spent some quality time with my geek friend, planning our schedules and overseas flights. We needed to meet in South Africa. These plans came together very simply. I packed all of my supplies into my large SUV and headed to Colorado. I used my false Colorado driver's license to rent a temporary storage facility where I could work and store my SUV. I rented an old, unremarkable car with cash. Since then, I've been using gloves that I bought for dealing with tires. These were placed on my rental automobile. The remaining tires were housed at the temporary rental storage facility. Everything was paid in cash due to tiny monetary gifts. Even the sales weren't documented. I bought a prepaid cell phone with my false Colorado license and cash. I called my techie friend and gave him my cell phone number. He had also purchased a disposable cell phone. If that happened, it would be difficult to follow up on our calls. Nobody was keeping track of my movements because I was still on vacation. My geek friend was now prepared to assist me with the deceit, which would offer me with an ideal alibi. I was supposed to be in Africa when Henry encountered his injured foe. We were ready for action. Timing would be really key. I loaded all of my necessary equipment and materials into the rented automobile. I double-checked everything I had: the gun, ammunition, surgical supplies, camping gear, desert camouflage food, and plenty of water, documents, money, and passports. I checked with my geek buddy, and he was prepared and eager. We waited until my firm purchased tickets for me to travel to Africa. I was due to leave on the 10th of the month. I only had a few days to get everything ready. I had already packed for the Africa portion of my trip. My friend took my African luggage. I only took a change of clothes and some personal items. I am on my own. I bought tickets to leave from Colorado. My own departure date would be the 12th from Denver, using my friend's name and identification. From there, I'd fly to South Africa to meet my geek pal. He would fly from the city to New York and then to South Africa using a passport bearing my name and his face. He would board on the 10th. He was to save all airport receipts for onward delivery to me in South Africa. He would fly back to the United States with his own valid passport. I would have arrived with my phony passport, but would have continued on to Angola with my real passport. My friend would take all of my luggage. My pal would only be away for 4 days. He would barely be missed. On the 10th, I made my move. My friend called me after we boarded. My alibi was secure. My prey was within my sights. Justice was on his way to southern Utah. Destiny, Henry, and I held a meeting. I wore gloves, so there were no fingerprints left as proof. As I approached the target region, I changed into well-washed coveralls. I wore a crimson long-sleeved shirt, a plain cap, a full fake beard, and shoes with the outside rear heel filed off. I inserted the brown contact lenses. I drove around Henrystown, making certain that several people noticed me, and the Utah license plate ID ran A. I had stolen a Utah license but kept the Colorado license plate. I scouted the location properly. I suppose I spotted Susan, but I couldn't be certain. I hoped it was her because I wanted her to understand how justice was administered. I left without engaging anyone in discussion. That night, I took up my preset position approximately 20 yards from Henry's usual resting place, beneath the only tree of any size. I carefully examined everything, utilizing the desert camouflaged materials to protect myself. My supplies were with me. For the last time, I calibrated the dart's exact dosage. Maybe I neglected to tell you. The gun was a dart gun, used to relocate wild African animals to new habitats. I estimated Henry would weigh around 280 pounds. I loaded a dart syringe for a 300-pound beast. I waited. I was perfectly concealed under the tent in my white robe. I showed Henry the document I had received from God. I knew I had him at one of his weakest points. The sun was really scorching. I drank plenty of water. It was hot under the camouflage tarp and falling, just as I had predicted. Henry arrived to work the wheat field, just as I had expected. He sat down under a tree approximately 20 yards from my hiding place around noon. I aimed at his gluteus maximus, and with a bang and a swish, the dart was securely inserted in his buttock. He jumped and batted the dart from his buttocks. It was too late. I quickly climbed out of my tent. I was now dressed in full white with no beard. I wanted him to see my face clearly. I was dressed as much as I thought Henry would like. An angel would appear. I just had about 20 seconds until he passed out. I hurried over to him. I yelled out to Henry. God, I hope the tranquilizer worked. He could have torn me limb from limb, but I was prepared. I had selected the weapons for my struggle with Henry. I had chosen the battlefield based on the timing. I had an element of surprise. Everything was going to plan, Henry. I yelled at him in his face. Ethan Allen, Susan's true husband, cried out to God, and God heard them. You sinned. I am the avenging angel who will execute God's judgment. Henry attempted to stand but fell to his knees. His eyes widened with terror. He attempted to talk but couldn't. I got close in his face so he could see me clearly and remember me as the last thing he saw before becoming a transformed man. His eyes glazed over in a number of seconds. He went out like a light dot. No one had heard or witnessed the events of this heinous crime. I was a nonviolent man. Henry was unconscious when the agonizing start of his torture began. Henry was mine. I gloated. If I had given him too large a dose and he died, that would be fine. But it was not what I wanted. I descended quickly on him. I was like a spider on its prey. Iron snapped, dragging his coveralls down to his ankles. There's no time to take his boots off. Next came his all-white cotton underpants. We were under the tree, out of sight of the road and home. I bent his knees outwards. His genitals were completely accessible. I wrapped a tight ligature around the base of his Johnny. After dragging a large amount of loose skin back to the base of his Johnny. I wanted him to heal, but without the weapon of sexual assault. My sharp 15-blade surgical knife ripped through his Johnny, leaving less than a half-inch. The ligature stopped any serious bleeding. I placed his huge Johnny on his chest temporarily. I applied a 10% solution of silver chloride to his Johnny's stump as an astringent. Quickly, now. I used another ligature on his testicles, another slash into his scrotum, and I pinched the left testicle out. This was exactly how we accomplished it. When I was a kid on the farm in Colorado, we had 2 young pigs. A clean cotton string was used to isolate his testicle. Pulling the rope taut, I tied triple knots and wrapped it again to secure the cord. Secure. The knife cut his testicle from its attachments. I again poured the astringent solution over the base and cut the string short. With a little assistance, the scrotum fell into approximate shape. He was going to spend the rest of his life without a Johnny, and with only one testicle, I was content. I accepted his Johnny like a prize. I stored it in a plastic bag with formalin solution as a preservative. I removed both ligatures. There was almost no blood. All of my items were carefully packed into another plastic bag. I secured his testicle around his neck. I wanted to put it in his mouth, but I feared it would kill him through aspiration or gagging. I did not want him to die yet. I wanted him to enjoy his newfound freedom from a massive, hefty organ and 2 testosterone factories. I wondered what Susan would think. I chuckled. This served both of them well. I was delighted to serve justice with such finesse. I wanted to be gone when he woke up, so I didn't wait to brag in person. Delaying gratification is indicative of maturity. I was mature. I retrieved everything from my refuge and smoothed out the dirt. The final step was to leave the written testament to the avenging angels. Visitation. This I positioned between his legs, his testicle proudly centered. It appeared that the testicle was being served on the white, shining plastic book. I was confident that news of this would spread quickly throughout the community. It would have to come to me another way, because I had no idea what was going on in the Utah desert. With this, I carefully packed all of my belongings in 2 enormous black plastic garbage bags. I returned my coveralls and beard. I made sure my size 13 footprints were plainly visible. I checked to make sure everything had been picked up. The site was devoid of everything. If an investigation was initiated, I wanted the physical evidence to point to a huge, slightly handicapped man. I wanted the avenging angel to have Ethan Allen's face. I forced an exaggerated hobble back to the old rent-a-rack, which was roughly a quarter of a mile across a field to the back road. Everything was loaded onto the vehicle. I double-checked that everything was on board. Nobody was in sight. I was off. I enjoyed a calm and very fulfilling vacation back to Colorado. All of my used clothes, the gun, and the beard were soaked in Boy Scout water. Kerosene was burned in the desert and then buried. The car's original tires were returned, and I turned it in. The Colorado license plate was reinstated, and the stolen plate was buried. The 4 old tires were offered by a bearded man in eastern Utah wearing gloves. I grabbed a taxi to the airport and departed for South Africa. My SUV was kept in storage using a phony passport and ID on a flight to South Africa. I reread the word from the avenging angel to Henry. Of course, because the texts were in the King James Version format, I utilized 17th century English to ensure authenticity. It went somewhat like this. Page 1. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. Page 2. Thou hast sent the devil and his messenger to you, and you have listened to him rather than me. God. Page 3. Thou must test the spirits to see if they are true. You are. It is not. Test that spirit. As a result, you were misled into lusting over Ethan Allen's wife. Page 4. Thou hast carnal knowledge, which I have forbidden you. Page 5. I've heard the screams for justice for my servant Ethan Allen. Page 6. Vengeance is mine. Thus says the Lord of hosts. Page 7. If Effendi plucks out your eye, it is preferable to be blind than to face the pangs of dying in hell. Page 8. My avenging angel has saved you from eternal damnation by eliminating the offending part. Page 9. Accept your God's judgment, or I will return in wrath and tear out your eyes so that you will not sin again by desiring. I slept well during my flight. I was at rest. I periodically felt my backpack and trophy. I smiled. A piece of Henry would always remain with me. That concept did not make me furious or concerned. I met a friend in South Africa. We exchanged pleasantries, and I awarded him a big bonus. I then flew to Angola on schedule, while he returned to the United States. We disposed of our cell phones in Africa. Henry's Johnny was an impressive award. My employment kept me at sea for the next 2 months. After returning to the United States, I called Susan's mother as part of a series of phone calls to friends and family. Susan returned home dejected. She admitted that Henry had gotten extremely angry after someone chopped off his Johnny. She feared for her life. The remaining spouses had nowhere to go. They assumed they'd been captured. She had persuaded them to accompany her into the horrible outer door. They simply couldn't. My brothers informed me they were relieved that justice was served. I told them what I'd been told. I have not confirmed nor denied any involvement in the mayhem in the Utah desert. I went to the funeral and lamented my friend's death from an accidental overdose of booze and anxiety medicines. I believe we just partied too much at night. How did I know he'd started using anxiety pills? I gave up thinking about killing Henry. A living horror was far preferable to the peaceful rest of death. Anyway, I might be caught the next time. After all, I wasn't a violent individual. Susan witnessed Henry's humiliation. Henry survived, but he was no longer the man of the town. Henry never filed charges. He accepted his situation as God's punishment for longing for another man's wife. Susan left Henry and moved closer to her mother, who helped raise her child. They both taught at schools. Susan never received her PhD. I really considered re-establishing contact with Susan, but I couldn't stomach the prospect of helping to raise Henry's children. She never got remarried. She followed in her mother's footsteps on what would have been our 10th anniversary. Susan received a withered yet well-preserved human phallus. There was no return address. I decided it was acceptable to return the trophy to the person who had previously worshipped it. I didn't need it anymore. I had a loving wife and 3 children who took up all of my time. I didn't need or want to recollect the past. In conflict, no one wins. Some suffer greater losses than others. I lost Susan. Henry lost his genitals. Susan too. Susan lost her PhD. Me and Henry. You, dear reader, may choose who lost the most. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts